regular meeting and work session meeting of the Pinehurst Village Council. I'll start with that favorite phrase. It's a beautiful day in Pinehurst. It is our regular meeting day, otherwise most of us would be outside enjoying the good weather as you do, I hope. So we welcome you to this meeting, and having called it to order, I would just make a couple of announcements. In the back of the room there is a sign-in sheet, as we always have, for comments from attendees, which will help happen at the end of this regular meeting section. And for those of you who may be watching this live stream, you can send comments to the email address publiccomments@vopnc.org. The village clerk will receive those comments by email and will distribute those to staff and council members after this meeting. But those of you who are here, there is a sign-up sheet in the rear, and that sign-up sheet will be taken up by the village clerk in a few minutes' time. Moving on to parts of our agenda, then we'll go to reports, and I'll start with our village manager, Jeff Sanborn.
Thank you, John. I don't have anything to report tonight.
Okay. From my perspective, working with village area groups, I've just remind everybody that the Holly Arts Festival is this Saturday. As always, it was expected to draw very strong participation, shall I say, from our community and around the county. And this year, I would certainly like all of you to be aware, and please tell your friends who may be attending this event from elsewhere, that if they come over to Village Hall area here and park on Rassy Wicker Drive especially, Kirk Tours will provide a free shuttle from parking in this area over to the core village. And that would be a wonderful way to help those who are coming and looking for a place to park. That's the best way to do that. The weather is supposed to be great, so I'm sure the turnout will be very large. And if I'm not mistaken, we also have our, I think our last Live at 5 on Friday night this week, or is that, so that's going to be a busy weekend in the village of Pinehurst this week. I enjoy those events myself, and I encourage you all to attend them. Working on further reports from council. Lydia, do you have any reports this week?
I do, thank you. Yesterday, the Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee met. They basically had two topics on their agenda. Number one, we got an update on the paths that go along Pine Vista and Mackenzie. Those are still being surveyed, and it's expected they will be completed in January. The committee also began to discuss projects for the next year, and they are hoping to come up with some recommendations to council in the next few weeks. But another thing, and Pat was there and Doug was there, we have such a great group of volunteers on all of our boards and committees, and it's, I appreciate that residents care enough about this community to volunteer their time and their talents. And so this is my plug. Anybody in the community that wants to serve your community, get a volunteer application off of the website and send it in, and when an opening comes up, your name will go into be considered. But you volunteers provide such a valuable service to the community, and I for one appreciate it. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Pat.
I just want to wish everyone a belated Happy Columbus Day for those of you that participated yesterday in the celebration. Thank you.
Jane? Jeff Morgan?
I have no reports, thank you.
No report. Moving on then, we'll go to item number 3, which is a motion to approve the consent agenda, including the minutes and a budget amendment report. Any council members have any questions about those or wish to pull something out from those consent items before we vote? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda, please?
I move to approve all the items listed and considered routine on the consent agenda.
It's a motion by Pat Pizzella. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Jane Hoagman. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. We'll move on to item number 4. Jeff? Or do you want me to hand that?
Go ahead, John.
Okay. Item number 4 is a proclamation from, Village has received from the National School Lunch Week to honor the members who prepare lunches in our schools and the students who get the benefit of those good lunches to help their education process. I received a request last week through Moore County Schools, who's been contacting other schools in the county to provide these proclamations. And I intend, if the council approves this proclamation, to deliver that to the school principal and maybe a few students at lunch over the next few days this week. So is there any discussion about the proclamation? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve that? Do we have a motion to approve
We don't
that?
have a motion to approve. Is there a motion? Do we need a motion to approve?
I thought we would need that. That's why I brought it to our attention, but
Well, I'll move to approve the
thank
proclamation.
you very much. That's good. That's a
Yes,
motion
second.
by Jane Hogeman, and it was a second by Patrick or Lydia? Lydia. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Fine. Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 5. That's a discussion to consider ordinance 2215, amending the Pinehurst Development Ordinance regarding short-term rentals.
You pulled my,
Excuse me? Sorry, I thought I heard a comment. I'm sure many of you are here for that purpose today. I want to give you a little outline of how I think we will proceed with the council to hear recommendations from the staff with respect to this very difficult, but also difficult subject, but also a subject that has brought a lot of good in the community and also a lot of angst. Today, we will receive staff recommendations based upon all the input, including at our last meeting on September the 27th. There are a number of issues in this document that need to be resolved today, and the result of today's discussion with the council will hopefully be a document that will be reworked by the staff based on decisions the council will make tonight, and they will come back to us for a vote on October the 25th. But we will talk about every issue in the document that staff has prepared or council has asked about, and many of them also that you and the public have asked us to explore. So this final document will address, I think, all the key issues that the council's been dealing with its staff and through comment from you for several months. We believe this document, when completed and voted on, will deal with some of our key issues with STRs, which include the rapid growth, classifying of STRs as non-conforming uses, maintaining the integrity of our neighborhoods, and also establish a enforceable regulatory structure to reduce nuisances and other inconveniences and provide safety provisions for the ordinance of Pinehurst. We're going to begin the discussion today with comments of whatever nature that all the council members would like to make. We'll then proceed to work with Darren and Jeff Sanborn to go through the documents and the recommendations, make decisions on those as we go along, and to review all those so we have a final document ready for next time. I'd like to start with council comments, and I'll start on my right with Jeff Morgan.
I've made numerous previous comments in the past, and I'll just wait to hear from Darren. Thank you. No further comments.
Jane?
Thank you. Over the last year, the council and the staff have undertaken really an enormous study, and many citizens have contributed to that. We've heard hours of public comments. We've received emails and correspondence from many different people. We've read materials from the School of Government, articles from across the country. We've looked at other town ordinances. We've received information from AirDNA and other platform analyses, state demographic information, Moore County tax records, information from the Moore County Convention and Visitors Bureau, and more. And we've conducted a statistically accurate survey on the quality of life in the village. We've had advice from our village attorney, and we have looked at case law in both North Carolina and other states. This is a very complex and complicated subject, but there are some areas I think we can all agree on. And one is the importance of preserving village character, because it's the foundation of our residents' quality of life, and it's the basis for attracting visitors here. And second, I think we all recognize there's a need for effective regulation of short-term rentals. And unfortunately, our ability to do this has been diminished by state law, which seems to me to be short-sighted for the state. I think the proliferation of numbers is part of the equation here. Lack of adequate management of some individual short-term rentals is part of the equation. But council is endeavoring to use the tools that are available to do the best it can to address those issues and to focus on incidents of behavioral problems as best as we're able. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shane. Lydia?
Thank you, John. And I actually typed something up so I could put my thoughts all in one place. So I'm going to read this. Where do I begin? This process has gone on for so long, which on one hand has been trying, but on the other hand, I've appreciated this amount of time to allow my thoughts and conclusions to develop. When the issue of short-term rentals first was presented to council, two things now stand out that we were hearing. Number one, the rapid increase in the number of short-term rentals, and two, the impact this was having on our neighborhoods. Based on these two pieces of information, I readily agreed that something was going on in our neighborhoods that needed to be addressed. As a council member, quality of life for our residents is by far the most important component of any decision we make. When we did the quality of life survey, I was happy to hear that our residents still believe they have a very good quality of life. If you accept the premise that quality of life is being harmed by those living near short-term rentals, I still believe the village has tools to deal with the concerns expressed. For example, the village has a compliance officer to deal with trash cans, and we have a police department to deal with the disruptions to our quiet neighborhoods. I also have had it drilled into me since elected that village staff and council make fact-based decisions. That's so important, and I want to repeat it. We make decisions based on facts. Thank you, Jeff Sanborn and Natalie. A concern for me is that we seem to be accepting as true the complaints voiced to us by residents. While I am very sympathetic to those complaints, council has been cautioned that we cannot consider as facts the complaints voiced in public comment. More importantly, whenever a resident comes to me with any concern, I investigate those concerns. For example, Jim Rohr came to me with his concerns about walking paths on the village green. Working with Jim and staff, we addressed his concerns and are working toward a solution. In my efforts to determine whether some of the public comments made to us were accurate, I've sought out the other side of some of the stories. In every case, I've concluded that there indeed was another side to the story. This exercise has confirmed the advice given to us that public comment should be viewed with a certain amount of skepticism. Trust, but verify. I also have a unique perspective on short-term rentals. My husband and I have hosted North and South and LPGA players and their families for at least 10 years. I walk our golf courses several times each year with the families of players, with the volunteers, and the media. Countless numbers of them stay in short-term rentals and love it. The families especially say that the only way the entire family can come is if they stay in a short-term rental. Even Mike Wan, the president of the USGA, boasts about staying in a short-term rental in the village. All of these people love staying in our community. Over the past few months, I've also gone and looked at short-term rentals in our single-family neighborhoods and talked with the neighbors. Actually, seeing a short-term rental firsthand gives me a greater appreciation for their appeal. Talking with the neighbors shows me that many of them actually enjoy having a short-term rental in the neighborhood. These neighbors are proud to extend hospitality to our visitors. I see value in having short-term rentals in all of our neighborhoods. I was happy to see our Planning and Zoning Board, after long and careful deliberations, recommend that short-term rentals be in all of our neighborhoods. I've said repeatedly, and I'll say it again, I'm the person in the middle. I would like for those who are opposed to short-term rentals to work with the owners of short-term rentals to find a way for these properties to exist in our neighborhoods with effective regulatory oversight. We are a community of smart people. It's okay if they disagree, but they care about Pinehurst, and I believe they should be given the opportunity to find a solution to these perceived problems. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. Pat?
Thank you. These STR issues brought to the council's attention by village residents at the beginning of this year began with basically two extremes: abolish them everywhere, permit them anywhere. Over the course of 10 months, cooler heads have prevailed, and the council is getting close to adopting a sensible solution to a complex problem. During the past 10 months, we heard from and were contacted by my guests a couple of thousand of individuals on all sides of the issue, some from as far away as California, but most others are just down the street from this village hall. We conducted an independent survey of Pinehurst residents, originally suggested to me in February that we do so by Marcus LaRose, a leader among the short-term rental owners and property managers. I don't know if Marcus is here, but I found that email when I was preparing for this evening's discussion. We reviewed an April North Carolina Court of Appeals decision on STRs in the Wilmington case and followed that by adopting an ordinance in June focusing on nuisances, unruly parties, overnight street parking, vandalism, etc., with fines of $1,000 for the first offense and $2,000 for subsequent offenses. That applied to the entire village, not just STRs. And it was passed by a 4-to-1 vote in this council. We then focused directly on the STR issue itself. A variety of concepts and ideas were kicked around. Councilwoman Bosch warned us that we are one of the fastest growing STR communities, and we've got to have some control of what happens here. And she described STRs as a monster growing in our community. Dr. Morgan described STRs as a business and said, "I would love to find a way to cap it." And he posed a question and then answered it himself. Why did Pinewild HOA ban STRs? The reason, he said, is because it affects the local lifestyle of the neighborhood. Councilwoman Hogeman advocated prohibiting STRs in all single-family zone residential districts. In July, we received the survey, and let me go back. I agree with just about everything that was said by my colleagues of those comments, because I think they had hit at the core of the issues that we face as a council and as a community. In July, we received the survey data from the ETC Institute that showed that the percentage of respondents rating the quality of life in their neighborhoods as excellent drops significantly when perceived proximity to one or more STRs was shown. That was the key takeaway from that data. Everyone knows I expressed some skepticism when the survey went out. But the data is as the data is. After hearing a great number of ideas and comments, a majority of the council began to express support for prohibiting STRs in single-family districts, myself included, and allowing the existing ones a 3-year grace period, or what's also known as amortization, to sell, move into, or convert their property to long-term rentals. As we heard further thoughts from residents and a variety of bellicose comments from some lawyers and wise counsel from some other lawyers, and we watched what other communities in similar situations to Pinehurst were doing, it now appears the majority of the council is ready to take action and stop kicking the STR can down the road or maintaining there is nothing we can do, because there is. I believe the best way to describe what we are likely to do is not just a win-win situation, it's a win-win-win-win situation. The briefest way to summarize what we are on the cusp of adopting is simply to say everyone who has an STR may continue to operate it. But the village of Pinehurst is using its zoning power to limit any future STRs. In the words of legendary boxer Roberto Duran, no mas. No more additional STRs in single-family residential districts, nor in residential multifamily districts. We heard from lots of people these last 10 months that wanted to eliminate STRs and people who wanted to be able to keep their STRs operating, both with interesting stories to make their case. And we heard some wild, dire predictions about economic impact on Pinehurst, losing golf tournaments if we abolish STRs now existing in our village. But we never heard from a person who said we need more STRs in the village of Pinehurst for our community. No one said that. This is a win for residents because the growth and rapid proliferation of STRs is ended. And the residents will now have the full support of our new zoning ordinance and village staff for enforcement purposes. This is a win for STR owners, worried about what they might have to do over the next 3 years. They can just keep operating those STRs without any end date as long as they remain in compliance with our new nuisance ordinance and other criteria the village may place on them. This is a win for the Pinehurst Resort and Country Club, our most famous employer and the prime reason we attract so many visitors, whose president told this council just a few weeks ago, quote, "The Pinehurst Resort and Country Club has significant concerns over the amount of and the rapid proliferation of short-term rentals in our community and their impact on the historical ambiance and the quality of life in the village." This is a win for affordable housing because by not allowing additional STRs in the residential multifamily area, which I believe we should not allow them, where our condos are located and the majority of the current STRs currently exist. The majority of our STRs exist in the multifamily area, not in the single-family residential. The 1,000 plus condos that are not presently STRs may continue to be available for full-time residents and not subject to real estate investors just looking to cash in on the Pinehurst brand. A concern that was voiced by a member of the Planning and Zoning Board when it decided to recommend permitting these everywhere, and a concern expressed by someone who came and testified before the Planning and Zoning Board, who was concerned that if we ended them in the single-family residential districts, that there would be this race to the residential multifamily, and we would crowd out, to quote one member of the P&Z board, the caddies and teachers that tend to live there, because that's our most affordable housing within this village of Pinehurst. Finally, this is a win for the village of Pinehurst, because the likelihood of a successful lawsuit is dramatically increased. We have heard for many months, and it was I think a thorough and accurate projection that we were going to get sued. But the reason we have dramatically decreased this is because we are dropping, in the proposal that we've discussed, the amortization issue, which was the centerpiece of people who wanted to challenge us legally. That really was it. And don't take my words for this. Let's listen to the words of Ari Bargill, the lawyer with the Institute of Justice that successfully won the Wilmington case and has been quoted as recently as October 1st on the Pilot's editorial page. Mr. Bargill is a well-respected attorney who specializes in land use and property rights law. In a September 27th letter from Mr. Bargill to the Village Council, he was coming here to testify, but he was stuck in Florida because that's where he lives, and there was a hurricane going on at the time. He, after describing in about 5 or 6 paragraphs the legal peril the village might face, he stated in his closing paragraph, he gave us advice. Let me read it from him. Quote, "In sum, the appropriate and legal remedy is to allow existing uses to remain and use your zoning power to regulate future use." He italicized future and underlined it. That is, after all, the entire point of zoning. The council is preparing to do just something along those lines by dropping the amortization issue and allowing the current STR properties to become a non-conforming use. So we're not going to rid any STR owner of any property. There's no property rights involved anymore. If you have one, you can keep one. I want to compliment the mayor and my colleagues on the council for enduring this STR 10-month marathon But I believe the process has produced a practical and sensible solution to a problem that has perplexed this village for more than a few years. And I want to compliment those active residents of Pinehurst on either side of this issue that demonstrated over the last 10 months that politics is truly the art of the possible, and that the voice of people can be heard, and that their elected representatives can be responsive. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. And I want to thank all of the members of the council for the time we've spent together on this issue and the different opinions that we've had. But it's been a process that we've sustained ourselves through, and with the help of the village staff, we'll continue to move to a completion of this decision tonight in preparation for hopefully our next meeting. At this point, we want to call upon Darren Burke and Jeff, of course, at any point you have direction for us and clarification, because I know you and Mike Newman and Darren have worked very closely on everything that we're going to see and hear tonight. So Darren, I think you have some presentation you want to make, which is going to discuss the key issues that we have yet to resolve that have been raised over the past few weeks and months, and then move into some detailed discussion of those, and at which point, kind of page by page, word by word, paragraph by paragraph, we'll get consensus from council as to what we want to do so that you have a clear message as to how to prepare for our next meeting. So at that point, I'll turn this over to you for your introductory remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Patrick stole a lot of my thunder. Thank you.
Jeff, you might, or Darren, you might want to get that microphone. Or you're
Oh,
going
I got it right
in
here.
a collar? Okay.
That's right here. So a lot of what Patrick covered is what we have in the, what we've prepared in some of our staff material. From the 9/27 meeting, we sat back, we took some of the comments that we heard at the 9/27 meeting, had some of the discussion that we had with council, and made some adjustments, some significant adjustments to the ordinance as proposed. We laid that out. We did not change Ordinance 2215 because Ordinance 2215 was the one that was under consideration at the time. What we did was we created a new attachment called Updated STR-Related Amendments, which we're going to go over in a minute, and we had a memo to support that. So I'm going to go over with what I normally do with a PowerPoint and go over some of those comments. So, of course, on 9/27, we had a public hearing at the council. We had a lot of discussion. We had a lot of discussion that night. No action was taken, but we got some direction from council on where we should be going, what direction we should be heading. Based on that input, staff prepared edits to the proposed ordinance 2215, again, not updated in notice that would, one, prohibit new STRs, as of right now, prohibit new STRs in single-family districts. That was the council proposal going into it. That is a council proposal that we have currently shown in that attachment. We are showing the permission to permit as a permitted use in area zone RMF, VMU, and VC. Staff, and that was an original proposal by council going into it. We are also, based on some of the comments that we've heard, proposing to add hotel and village cottage professional as two other districts where STRs could potentially locate. One of the major changes that we're proposing, as Patrick had stated, is to eliminate amortization and allow all existing STRs to remain as non-conforming uses which run with the land. It changes with property owners. It does not require registration or permission to rent to continue lawful operation as a non-conforming use. We've also added, because we've heard some concerns over some of the STRs are operated half the year, 3/4 of the year, quarter of the year. We're proposing a provision with some significant changes to the non-conforming use provisions that if a STR cessates or discontinues for a period of 365 days a year, it would have to revert back to the conforming use in the district, which in the case of a single-family district, the majority of that's going to be single-family uses. We're also proposing to create a non-conforming use certificate that shall be issued, and this covers all non-conforming uses in the community, shall be issued, that essentially officially recognizes the legal non-conforming status of a use. So an STR owner would come in that's non-conforming, we would issue them a non-conforming certificate. That would, again, that's a protection for current and future property owners that use, that non-conforming use, is a legal non-conforming use. It will be required, again, of all non-conforming uses, not just STRs, but other uses that are non-conforming. There's a public benefit of us knowing of us understanding the status of non-conforming uses. Compliance with the SR9 standards would be required of existing and new STRs, recognizing that most of the requirements, the housing, the building, the fire, they already apply to every dwelling unit in the community. We've talked about that there's municipal code improvements that we've already adopted to get at some of the nuisance-related issues. And then that was really the end of my memo. And I'm going to go into kind of the proposed, unless there's any questions, I'm going to go into some of the proposed amendments, if you'd like.
Yeah. Any questions of Darren at this point? That were the summary of the major issues we'll be talking about right now, and you can proceed on that.
Okay.
And again, we're going to kind of drill, as just a reminder to everybody, we're going to go through every issue, get it settled, move on. Thank you.
I'll go through every issue. So last time, this was the exact slide kind of that I used last time at the public hearing. And what you can see is what we've changed. The areas that are in red underlined or are struck through are some of the major changes that we're proposing after that 9/27 public hearing. First of all, we're proposing some major changes to Section 2 of the PDO regarding nonconformities. That would make changes to Section 2.32, which would create the non-conforming use certificate. That's a pretty significant change. We'd also add a cessation of use section of 365 days for STRs. We have cessation of use provisions of 120 days for most uses. Then I think we have a 30-day cessation of use for banks, insurance, offices, things like that in the village center or village commercial zoning.
Could you go over those numbers again just now?
It's
The
100
differences?
The cessation of use specific for STRs would be 365. For all other use, and then in the village center, in the VC zone district, if you operate an office of professional service, if that goes away for a period of 30 days, there's a 30-day cessation of use in the village commercial zoning. And then for all other uses in the community, it's 120 days.
That village center provision is only for first floor, right, Darren?
I'm sorry, yes, for first floor uses.
Do we know how other communities handle cessation of use in the state of North Carolina?
Yes.
What can you share with us?
Cessation of use is a standard use in zoning ordinances, but the numbers can range. There's no standard. Some are 365 days. Where I came from in Wisconsin, it was a minimum 365 days because of statutes. But because there's not a governing statute in North Carolina, you can have differing periods as determined by the local legislative body. So I've seen 6 months, I've seen 3 months, it's all over the board. Any questions?
Yeah, I was going to ask, what attracted you all to 365? What makes that like a workable number? Since it sounded like it's the largest number of any cessation of uses for anything else we have in the district.
That is correct.
Okay.
Darren, can I attempt to answer that?
You may.
And I've used this example in a couple other conversations. We have heard over and over that many of our existing short-term rentals in the village of Pinehurst aren't the typical year-round short-term rental business type operations. Many of them are for example, some of them are residents of Pinehurst who may leave the area for a month of the year, every year, and they choose to put their house on the short-term rental market for the short period of time that they're gone. With that in mind, if we've stuck with the 120-day provision that typically applies to most other uses in the village, let's say a family that lives in number 6 typically leaves town for the month of September every year, and it's been their pattern of short-term rental use year in, year out, that's their established short-term rental operation. And they put their house on the market for short-term rental use every September. They've been doing it for years. If we stuck with a 120-day provision, then technically at January 1st, they would be deemed as having ceased use of their short-term rental, which we know is not true because they have a historical pattern that said that they were doing it every September. So they haven't ceased their previous use. So to avoid those types of situations, the best compromise, if you will, that staff could come up with was to set it at 365 days.
Well, I'm concerned about that provision too. The 365 days is triple the standard length of time for cessation of use that's in our PDO now and has been there for many years. And I do understand that there are different patterns of use that some STRs have. Some operate, let's say, call it seasonally, and others on a more year-round basis. So if you've got a year-round operation and you cease use for 120 days, it's pretty clear you've ceased use. But if you are only operating between November and February, say, then the fact that you're not operating for 120 days in the middle of the summer doesn't indicate that you stopped. But if we are going to have a certificate, a non-conforming use certificate, which is designed to describe the nature and scope of the use, because it's not fair to assume that somebody who had only been renting seasonally should be allowed to increase or escalate their scope of use to year-round. So there's going to be some kind of a description in the certificate, right, of what has been the pattern of use up to now. Is this what we anticipate doing? So couldn't there be maybe two classifications of short-term rental usage, for example, seasonal and year-round, and if year-round usage is demonstrated, then 120 days would be the same that applies to all other non-conforming uses for cessation, period. But if it is a seasonal type of use, then maybe we could craft something differently for that and say,
It's an interesting idea. I don't know how that would work out mechanically.
well,
I do have a
understand-
concern that having different cessation of use criterias that would apply to different properties that are of the same use
But if they're
could be
if they're
problematic.
differently, that's true if the uses are similarly situated, as best I understand it, which isn't probably very wonderfully. But if we could create two different categories based on different standards of usage, maybe we could create a more focused,
I think if you had two different defined uses for short-term rentals, what you're suggesting would be easier to defend.
two different scopes of use.
Two different defined short-term rental definitions, two different uses.
One other way maybe to attack this is to have, I guess picking up on James' thought, use the lesser of. If the pattern of use of a particular property is such that, like in your example, Jeff, it's rented for 30 days a year or 45 days a year, and that's it. It's pretty much the same time. Maybe we could have that read the lesser of 60 days or 50 days or something like that. Maybe that fits into your additional definition. I don't know. It's just a way to come at it from a little bit different angle, looking at the lesser of.
I would caution us not to try to get too cute on cessation of use. This is that it's a tricky legal framework to negotiate, and I think the simpler, the more broadly we can apply rules, the better off we're going to be.
My question, I tend to agree with trying to keep it as simple as possible. My question is, if the family you described sells their home to somebody else, and the certificate moves on with the property, and so it can remain a short-term rental if the new purchaser wants that. That new purchaser could be more than 45 days. In other words, that new purchaser could be having an STR all the time, so to speak, rather than just sort of continue what the previous owner was doing. Is that right?
It's a very good point, and we're still working on some potential refinements associated with intensification, because intensification is another factor that can legally be considered to terminate well, you can't terminate it. You just can't allow them to intensify.
What's the definition? How does intensification work? Is that a legal term of art or a real estate term of art?
It's not defined.
Yes, it is.
Oh, it is. Okay.
Yes, intensification and expansion. Yeah, and one is just making it bigger, and another is changing the
There's not a,
type of use. So.
I'm not aware of there being a definition in the general statutes, but intensification is a factor that's allowed by the general statutes.
Okay.
Not to terminate a use, you just can't allow it to intensify.
Okay. Well, that may be something that works out. That interests me. I prefer the most practical method, and but I'm not hung up one way or the other. But I prefer we be practical, and I hear what you're saying. But I also have the concern of the 365. This sounds really large compared to everything else we do, and so okay. Thank you.
Darren, on this point, could you bring up that I'll call it the red underlined attachment? Because as we go through these, I think that's pretty much the order we're going to do.
Yep,
We started with
I'm going to have that, yes.
Would you want to call that up for these discussion points? Because cessation is one. We want to come back to non-conforming, perhaps. But
John, if I could recommend, let's let Darren finish the presentation,
Okay.
then we can go to the document.
okay.
Otherwise, we're going to be trying to jump back and
Well,
forth.
I thought we
yeah.
would. All right, fine. Go ahead.
You're jumping into it. I was just going over an overview of what changed.
Yep.
This is a good conversation. I'm getting into actual those points as we come through. But
Good.
all right. So the cessation of use at 365 days. That would be a change in red that we'd have to add to the PDO. We're not proposing any changes to the Section 4 public hearings, permits, and approvals. There is a recommendation on the table 8.51A, and we're going to get to that in a moment. And then when there was a lot of significant changes to the ordinance structural with that SR9 is Section 8.6, where we're proposing SR9, and we backed out two or three, I think two development standards. But this is what we originally had going into it. Special development requirements that apply to all STRs. That's a change. Requiring a development permit, then not for existing, but just for new STRs. Amortizing in certain districts, that's proposed to be eliminated. And then require existing STRs to come into compliance or cease operations by a certain date. So there's no amortization for that. And then we are proposing no changes to the definitions at this point. So the table 8.51A, this is where we had a lot of significant time devoted to it, and this is what the staff proposal currently is. You can see the SR, we're proposing to apply to all the, if the ordinance passes without making STRs a permitted use in the residential districts, what we're proposing is that we make sure that everybody knows that the SR9 standards apply across the board in those areas. We're also continuing to show RMF as a district where STRs could locate, hotels where they could locate, VCP, VMU, and VC. So Those are significant points of discussion for tonight and that we need direction on. And the one other point that we're stating is that unless you're going to start to put X's next to that homestay where they can locate, we need to not approve that on table 8.51A, because if we approve that with a homestay on the table and we don't seed it with anything, then it becomes a prohibited use, similar to some of the other, like the dormitories, rooming houses.
Yeah. I think we discussed that the need to address homestays is not something that we have to do tonight.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right, and it's something we can do downstairs.
That's what Darren is describing, is
Yeah,
that in order to do that, we
I
need
think we agree with
to
that.
strike it from here, because
Okay.
without having
I
any
agree.
X's, it becomes a prohibited use all the way across.
Just for a visual for everybody, when you're putting those letters SR in those categories on short-term rental, I think what you're indicating is that non-conforming uses can continue.
Correct.
That's what okay.
And they have to
And
adhere to
special-
SR9.
And SR,
And SR.
yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
That's really the important part, is the SR applies to it.
Yeah.
Hey, Darren, does SU mean permitted as of right?
Special use, it's a
But
special
that's
use.
not permitted as of right?
No, it has to go through a special use requirement.
Only an X?
Yes, an X is permitted by right. With no other, you come in, you show that you have compliance with our ordinance, and we issue a development permit. SU means you come to the council with a special use permit request, and you have to go through the quasi-legislative process, quasi-judicial process, and issue the permit that way.
Right. So you're only permitted as of right if you have an X?
Correct.
Okay.
And there's a footnote on this chart, at least in one of the drafts, it explains that.
Yes, it does. Well, I skated it up for this presentation.
Yeah, go ahead.
So for the proposed amendments, this is where we get into that section, that SR9, and this is where we did propose to make some significant changes. And this one, we're stating, this is number one: after the effective date of this ordinance, all applicants seeking to establish any new short-term rentals shall be required to obtain a development permit from the village. And that commences the development activity. You're requesting approval to commence a development activity. All short-term rental dwelling units operated prior to the effective date of this ordinance are not required to obtain any development permit, we're making that clear, or any other type of permit or permission as a condition to rent, and are not required to register their short-term rental with a village, but shall request issuance of a non-conforming use certificate as set forth in subsection 2.32, which we're going to get to, I have a whole presentation on that, of this ordinance. All short-term rentals, whether lawful non-conforming uses or new short-term rentals established after the effective date of this ordinance, shall comply with the following standards. Then I'm going to go into the standards. The significant difference, or the change that we took out from before, is development permits are non-transferable when a property is sold. So we took that off, because once you get your development permit, you have that development permit until it's potentially revoked. Or non-conforming short-term rentals shall be regulated by subsections 14 and 15, and that was the amortization. That was really the amortization section. So questions on? I mean, you can ask me questions as we're going along, or
Darren, if I could jump in, I'd just like to highlight the fact that non-conforming use certificate that we're proposing here is primarily intended to protect the rights of our existing short-term rental owners. There's a bunch of them out there, and, trying to, I can envision a situation where 4 years from now, we're having a discussion with a property owner about whether or not that was an existing use. And without having this resolved now, we are setting both parties up for potential legal action.
Can we require that they get this, or we just strongly encourage that they get it? I mean, I would think if I was an STR owner, I would jump at the opportunity to have this sort of get out of jail free card going down the road for whenever I would sell my property, or if someone would make a claim that you can't be renting that out as an STR. Mm-hmm. But having said that, I'm trying to figure out what is the village authority or responsibility to say you shall or may or must have this.
Oh, right now, we're showing shall, so, but, I can't, this thing doesn't work very well. So it says in, I think, line 5, development to register their short-term rental with the village, but shall request issuance of non-conforming use certificate. So that becomes a shall. I mean, it can become a may, it can become.
Are we, I guess you're comfortable in saying shall is the operative word, and we can have that word
We're
there?
comfortable with it.
Because it's not something that you have to sign up for every year.
That's right. It's not recurring. It's
No.
just
And you're not-
documenting the condition right now.
It just to establish a baseline.
Yeah.
So everybody knows where they are.
And you don't, and you're not losing your non-conforming
And
status.
it's not a requirement.
It's not a permission.
For
because
rental.
When they come to us with the application, we shall issue it. So you don't see that language here, but it's in
It
section
is in
2.
the non-conforming section when we get there at the
Right.
end. It's at the very end. Proposed amendment, so again, we renumbered and reordered. The red is really where we made some changes, and that was based on some of the planning and zoning board input. You can see a minimum of 1 operable smoke detector, 1 operable carbon monoxide detector, and then you can start to see where we're tying, the addition, we're tying where there is the corresponding state code requirement or local code requirement. So you understand it's not just this requirement, it's a requirement that's in place.
For the purposes of everybody who's watching and here, are those things now missing from our code? In other words, we don't have in the code now that bedrooms shall meet the minimum
We
size?
do. That's, when it says section 153.18 of the Pinehurst Municipal Code, that refers back to the minimum housing code regulations, as does D, as does E.
What's new?
What's in red is new.
I think what would be, well, if you look at section 42A 31.6 of the Vacation Rental Act, it actually states that you have to have a carbon monoxide detector. So we're making it clear as part of the SR9 that you have to meet some of this requirement. You have to meet other requirements too, but we're saying that we want to make sure that you're meeting this.
So our code in this ordinance is reinforcing some things that already exist
Correct.
and adding a little extra in there so that a short-term rental operator will be fully aware, as would a rentor would have some knowledge of this also.
Correct. It's some of the more significant ones, the egress, things like that. So if we're developing a development permit, for new short-term rentals, we're going to ask to make sure this will be something that they affirm that they meet all these requirements as part of that permit process.
Thank you.
There will be something new coming up here in a second. So the second section, egress, again, egress is currently a requirement. It's a requirement by the fire code as well, I believe. And then again, there's the add to lessen congestion in the streets and to prevent overcrowding of land as authorized by GS 160D 701. That is the zoning grant of power under the statutes. A minimum 1 parking space, that has not changed. And Patrick, to answer your question, probably the only other one that I'm not seeing a building code or a fire code related to as of yet would be the cooking facilities in each of the rooms. But so that would be something, that's potentially new. It's been non-controversial that, you don't want a 220 electric service running in every bedroom in the house, things like that.
Are STRs need to be compliant with the ADA?
It would generally depend on if it was if that rule applied at construction. So most of them are probably exempt from it. I think STRs are exempted because it's a 1 and 2. Most of them are regulated by the 1 and 2 family code. I don't believe the 1 and 2 family code has to incorporate ADA accessibility.
Sounds like an interesting question to be resolved in the courts in the future, though.
Yeah, okay, no,
Yeah.
it's become more and more common. That's why I asked it, but I understand sort of the grandfathering aspect of homes and double-family homes.
especially some of the older ones. But when you get into some of the commercial uses, like new multiple family, things like that, they are required to meet some ADA accessibility requirements. Section 8 we're getting to the end of it. Again, you can see that we're adding to ensure that the owners of short-term rentals provide fit and habitable housing as required by GS 42A17B, which is a Vacation Rental Act, and to prevent overcrowding of land, the avoidance of undue concentrations of population, to lessen congestion of streets, and to prevent overcrowding. That's where we get the maximum. That's the proposal is maximum 2 adult guests per bedroom. The other major change would be down in K, where I think the original ordinance says, no, they shall not be used for special events and large gatherings. We made an adjustment to that because we were having a hard time actually defining some of that stuff. So what we're proposing is in residential zoning districts, short-term rental units shall not be used for special events as defined by section 10.2. That's an existing ordinance definition. It's not going to hit everything, or other commercial type large gatherings. So if it's being held consistently for some type of commercial or ticketed venue or thing like that, that would be something that we would evaluate and take a look at if we got complaints.
What's a special event? What's a prohibited special event?
Prohibited special event is going to be something where they're using it for commercial purpose, like a ticketed event.
Like a what?
So 10.2 does define it as.
It does. I don't know if it goes. I don't know if we might need to look at it, but it's defined as, we don't define large gathering. So a special event is currently defined as any activity or circumstance of a business or organization which is not part of its daily activities. Such activities may include, but are not limited to, grand opening, closeout sales, and fundraising membership drives, temporary events conducted by civic, philanthropic, educational, or religious organizations. So it doesn't fit cleanly into the STR. We can adjust that. We can still make an adjustment to that, but that is also why we added or other commercial type large gatherings.
You said, go back to your fundraising. I was thinking about political fundraiser. Is a political fundraiser a special event?
If it's a large gathering,
What's large?
yeah, you know. We might need to work through that a little bit, but everything is going back to some of our experience that we had.
And what's a large? Is a
25
large
with-
family?
With 25 Magnolia. That was one of the ones where we had that large gathering. We had a large gathering at 25 Magnolia, and that is what kind of prompted some of this. It's hard to define, but if we start to see ticketed events, if we start to see it as some type of venue, then we know that it would be in violation potentially of that particular section.
What's a ticketed event? What if it's a large political fundraiser and you have to pay to go and it's at a home, like was done a couple of weeks ago in town? Is that, I mean, I'm trying to figure out how minutely we want to manage what goes on inside a home.
Well, that might be something we need to, continue to define. I mean, the provision itself is not uncommon. It's not an uncommon provision, but the actual enforcement would require some type of interpretation. So if we see something going on and we write somebody up for something and they take issue with us on that particular issue, the first stop would be the Board of Appeals. It's not going to be for a one-time. It's not going to be generally for a one-time event. It's going to be something that happens week in and week out. That's where we're going to run into the issue. It's not the one-off wedding at somebody's house. It's not the one-off whatever. It's not the one-off political fundraising. If that place becomes month in, week out, used for some types of events like that, I think we could make a case that it's some type of large gathering or a special event.
It just concerns me to have a definition that's not realistic. I agree, I think it needs to be defined. I'm just concerned about having a definition that's not realistic in our community.
We can, again, there's.
We have a definition we can use in this document, but we can also change that definition
That's
over time.
correct. We can do that.
Fine tune that. Let's carry on.
Okay. KL contacted, and this is coming out of the Planning and Zoning Board's recommendation. Contact information along with these special requirements, the rules, the special requirements shall be conspicuously posted and otherwise made available to tenants. So those would be that's the major changes to those sections of SR 9. And then the real major changes are coming up next. These are what was removed. So
Before you move on, I have one question about this, and that has to do with insurance in short-term rental homes. Almost every homeowner has an insurance policy, but there's a distinction between a homeowner's policy and a landlord's policy in the insurance world. I don't think it's the village's business to require any homeowner to have insurance. It's sort of on their own back. It's your risk, but most people get insurance. But it's a little bit of a different issue with someone who has a short-term rental and sleeps 10 or whatever is going on, whatever is appropriate based on the size of the short-term rental. Does the village have any authority or to require such type of protection? Do we do that for businesses or hotels within the village, that they should have a landlord policy for, we don't. So it's really in the hands of that homeowner who's using it as a short-term rental. So, and between them and their insurance agency, if they have a homeowner's policy and they're actually a landlord most of the time.
Their lender, correct. From a development perspective, insurance policies change. How are we going to, effectively enforce insurance requirements on an SR? We can easily enforce some of the development regulations, but an insurance regulation, it's not something that we typically deal with.
Yeah, I'm not sort of advocating. I'm hunting to learn more about this situation. I had my own experience years ago in purchasing a rental property and finding out that at the last moment that unless I said I was moving into it, my insurance policy was going to be a lot different. And so I hadn't forgotten that experience. Okay.
They're going to want you to pay more, correct?
They were going to want me to pay more. That is correct.
All right. So some of the major provisions that have been removed. So we were proposing to remove the whole section on revocation because we're already proposing the new section on revocation that under 4.2 that's changing. So we're proposing to eliminate that right now. We are also talking about removing this one, which was compliance period for SR 9 standards. This was if you were permitted use, you had to come into requirement by a certain date, or you will cease operating. So it's an amortization provision based on the use. And this was the real one that the other amortization period. Amortization period. This is where we did remove this one. Owners of existing short-term rental units were not permitted by right in Table 8.51A are prohibited and shall cease operation as a short-term rental unit by October 1st, 2025. So that is a significant change that, Patrick, you'd opened with. Proposed amendments, and this is where we're getting into some of the new changes that you didn't consider last time. We haven't really publicly gotten to a discussion on, and that is really the non-conforming use aspects. As we got into our discussion, start talking about what we can do, what would be a benefit for us, potentially from a public policy standpoint, is making some adjustments to the non-conforming use section. So really what we would do is we would add subsections, which means some other things would be moved down within the existing ordinance, but I'll go over the new ones in red. So right now, well, it starts out A is a non-conforming use of land shall not be enlarged, extended, or intensified in any way except as provided below. So we're proposing, and we're not proposing any changes at this point to A. But B would be inserted underneath. Within the village, there are some uses which may be non-conforming. The use was allowed when it was constructed as first used, but does not meet the current zoning regulations. These non-conforming uses may have a right to remain and continue to be used as they were originally constructed and used, provided the original use has not been discontinued for a period for longer than the periods set forth in subsection G. That's the subject section G that discusses the cessation of use, which right now we have at 365 days, as to particular types of non-conforming uses. Any questions on that? I think you're getting into it. We had a little bit started to get into it on the period.
Again, we're
earlier in
going
the
to come back and
presentation.
discuss that. You're given the highlights. Let's get that finished and
Yep.
get into the details.
And then the non-conforming use certificate. So again, this is another major addition. We think it does benefit both the non-conforming use party, and it will benefit the village from a public policy perspective. A non-conforming use certificate is an official declaration issued by the village confirming the legal non-conforming use status that is attached to the property for the benefit of current and future property owners, to be assured that the current and original use may lawfully continue and are afforded the benefits identified in this subsection. The certificate shall describe the nature and extent of the nonconformity and is acknowledgement by the village that the use was legal at the time of construction and original lawful use and was lawful prior to the adoption of the new zoning ordinance. It is therefore allowed to lawfully remain so long as it is not discontinued under the provisions of subsection G, which again applies to more than one class of uses, or enlarged, extended, or intensified as prescribed by subsection A. This is the issuance section. So this would be C1. So this kind of lays out the process for how it's issued. So issuance within 365 days of any use being made a non-conforming use as defined by section 10.2 of this zoning ordinance, or within 365 days, which should be days of the after adoption of this ordinance, whichever is later, such non-conforming uses shall apply for a non-conforming use certificate that shall be issued by the village planner upon the property owner providing documentation acceptable to the village, establishing the legal existence of the original non-conforming use and documentation that the original use has not been discontinued for the applicable periods set forth in subsection G. You can tell that an attorney helped me write this. As to the request for non-conforming use certificates from owners of short-term rental dwelling units in existence and operated prior to the effective date of this ordinance, then we'd have to insert the adoption date. Proof sufficient to establish the lawful non-conforming status may include, among other forms of documentation, Moore County tax records, rental agreements and releases, occupancy tax records, or other similar types of documentation confirming and establishing the preexistence of the non-conforming use for short-term rental purposes. The village issues short-term use certificates in order for current and future owners to be assured that the current use may lawfully continue. That is a mouthful. Sorry.
Just
So-
want to, go ahead.
Well, go ahead.
I'd like to walk through a scenario if I am.
You want to do that when we come back to this section?
Well, it has to do particularly with the non-conforming use
Okay.
issue and when the property is transferred. If I'm buying a piece of property that is an STR, and it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath piece of property, when I own it, from what I understand, is I can't turn that into a 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom STR.
That would be increasing the intensity.
So the property size, in essence, from an STR standpoint, does not grow, does not intensify, and I've learned that word. Okay,
That is correct.
thank you.
Or even really number of bedrooms if they chose to carve it up smaller or something. That would be an intensification as well.
I get you. Thank you.
Darren, I have a number of comments on this whole section 2.3.2. Should I wait and do it all at the end, or do it now?
I'm almost done.
Okay.
I have
We're
one
going
more
to try to
slide.
finish these highlights, and we're going to go back, and we're going to go through each one of those. So that's when we'll ask our questions.
Okay, so this is not the comment period?
Not yet. Let's get this summary over.
So this is the last section under cessation of use, and the only changes that we're proposing to cessation of use is to add the STRs into it. And you can see this is a long section where we talk about the 120 days for general uses. Then we get down into non-conforming banks, credit unions, financial services, and professional services located in the VC district shall not be afforded the same 120 days, but rather a 30-day cessation. And that's for the first 4 uses. And then we're proposing to add, if a dwelling unit is not used as a short-term rental for 365 days or more, the use shall be deemed to have been discontinued and shall thereafter be used only for a conforming use. And then last, proposed amendments, excuse me, for the 4.2.12 revocation of development permit, we're not proposing any changes to that, and we're not proposing any changes to the definitions at this point. And with that, I'm now done.
Okay, all right. Now, we've already anticipated and you've answered some of our questions on some of these, but I think we're going to need to go back one by one to make sure all the questions are answered. You have what you need, and council's made a direction to you of a majority of the council as to what we're going to do in each of these situations. So with that understanding, okay, I think it would be helpful, at least from my point of view, and maybe other members of the council, if we use that red,
Okay, yes.
unless you have something better,
The new draft language.
the new draft language, because that's going to be in the
I was gonna
order
get that.
that we've been looking at it for
Yep.
the last couple of days since it was posted.
That's correct.
And I think some of us may have our questions organized along that line anyhow.
Kelly, can I steal that mouse then?
That help, Jane,
What are we
Jeff,
doing?
come back and work from the document we had earlier, the red line document that's now in front of us.
Okay.
Kelly's
Go
zooming
through
a little
that,
bit,
that'll
too.
be our order. I think that helps Lydia as well as to organize that. Pat? Yeah, okay. All right. All right, so here we have 2.3.2, which you've given a little summary of before.
Yep.
Are there, are there any questions of council members or any changes to this section that we want to make? And let's just go through one at a time. Darren, you can tick these off. We'll go right to section B, correct?
Correct.
On 2.3.2?
2,
Okay, yeah, I have several.
okay. And relative to B, C, or all several?
Sorry?
Starting with B, or the whole of section 2.3, however you organize is fine.
I don't really like section B because I think 2.3.1 covers it, but
Well, if you have questions about 2.3.2, which you do,
okay, well, I
Let's just
already,
start with
I
each
already told that
paragraph.
to Darren, so
And-
I don't think we need 2.3.
Why, is it redundant? Why don't we not need it?
Because in the existing PDO, section 2.3 is all about nonconformities. And there's nonconforming uses, there's nonconforming lots, there's nonconforming buildings, there's nonconforming signs. So 2.3.1, at the very beginning of that chapter, gives a generalized blurb on what do you mean nonconforming, which is what B does as well. I don't know that we really need it because it is already in there, but.
Because I think we go into a more specific discussion on uses and then tie it back to the cessation in G.
Okay.
So I think
I'm not going to,
it's not,
And I think the language in 2.3.1 is about nonconformities in general. And
This is STR specific.
this is uses specific.
user specific. Yeah.
I'm fine.
All right.
and I'm the last one to ask for additional language in the PDO, but I don't think this one's helpful.
Are there any other questions from council on 2.3.2B? B. Are we in agreement then that that should be included? Is anybody opposed to including that? Hearing none, go to the next one. That's completed. B.
Non-conforming- oh, yep. That's the certificate.
Fine. Darren, you want to add anything to your comments earlier on C? All right, who has questions on C then? Jane?
okay. So as it's now written, 2.3.2 provides for discontinuance of nonconforming uses in several ways. Subsection A says they shall not be enlarged, extended, or intensified. B says they shall only that only maintenance and minor repairs are allowed. C says over 50% damage or destruction and to the building ends a nonconforming use. D, changes of use are limited and the use can't be changed back later. And in E, a use cannot be reestablished after cessation of use. So, new section 2.3.2, B and C both, address discontinuance, and they refer to some of those subsections, but they don't refer to all of them. In B, I think they only apply, refers to subsection
G.
G and B. And in C, it refers to A and G. But I think that both sections, if you're going to start specifying subsections that address this continuance, you have to put them all in. Otherwise, it's going to appear as though those unlisted subsections don't apply anymore. I think we should throw them in. Second of all, talking about
Can I ask,
proposed subsection,
I was just going to ask Darren, I hear what you're saying. How do you respond to that, Darren?
They do apply.
They do apply, but is there a need to have what the lawyers say, belts and suspenders here and be redundant or not?
I will inquire with our attorney.
okay. So, second of all, in the proposed subsection C, in the second sentence, it says sort of in the middle of the sentence, that the use was legal at the time of construction and original lawful use. Well, when you're talking about a non-conforming use arising, it may not arise at construction. So I think that and should be an or. Third of all,
And/or.
Yeah. Let's do it that way, Jeff. And/or.
Okay?
in the first sentence of proposed subsection C1, are we there yet or not?
Are you through this one?
C1.
Are you through C?
We're adding and/or, we're moving on to 1.
I heard that. You're
Is that
done?
okay?
Yes?
Oh, okay.
So we'll go to 1, which is your question.
Go ahead.
I would add a little bit of language in the first sentence where it says, upon the property owner providing documentation acceptable to the village, establishing the legal existence, I would add nature and extent of the original non-conforming use. And here's the good news. I printed out all my comments,
I thought you, yes.
and
God
I'm going to pass them around. Okay,
God
so-
bless you, Jane.
You give one to Darren and pass them the other way, and one's for Kelly.
Do I get one?
This is so nice.
Do I get one? Oh, I do.
And
John. Yes, I did, thank you. It's one page.
that's all for C.
Okay. C1, right? So we're done with that?
Well,
Oh, anybody else though, right? Yeah.
of your recommendation, is there any dissent on that? Pat, Jeff, Lydia?
No, I agree. I am somewhat sympathetic to Jane's earlier comments about including, even if it's redundant, all those other items in this section. But you'll check with the lawyers. But I just think we'll be safer rather than sorry if we omit them.
So for a hypothetical here on the previous paragraph there, heaven forbid a tornado comes and hits and knocks out 15 houses in our village, and one of those happens to be a short-term rental. Insurance comes in and says, okay, we'll repair your house. Let's say they're at 75% destruction across the board on there. Does that mean when the short-term rental is reconstructed along with the other 14 houses that they can no longer be a short-term rental?
Say that again?
If there is 75% reconstruction required,
Yeah,
and let's just assume magically they all had 75%,
yeah.
more than 50%, and you've got 15 houses that are being rebuilt. One of those was a short-term rental. does that mean that 14 houses then continue as their regular use on there, and then the short-term rental now loses its short-term rental capability?
I thought it would not, right?
No, if
Just
it's
making
a-
sure, just when you
Yeah.
talk about the 50% aspect there, this is out on the beach, when people have beach houses, there's certain ones that are non-rebuildable lots and things like that that come in.
We have a provision called acts of God. So if it's other than acts of God, which you know, a tornado coming through is going to be considered that. But if it's a willful, something that you've taken down willfully, then you don't get it back.
Speak up, Darren.
Oh, if
So effectively, if they have repairs that are needed because the roof needs repairing, all that kind of stuff, it's not an issue like in that sense. That's what I'm getting at. But what I'm making sure is that they don't have the loss of the use of it secondary to something that was beyond their control of what goes on. I understand if you're saying I'm going to reconstruct the house to do something and intensify it and things like that. I'm just making sure. Okay.
and some of that might fall into maintenance as well. So there's.
Some would, yeah.
Yeah, I understand, but usually maintenance for short-term rentals is actually better than people with ownership of houses that they're living in and also long-term rentals. So I would expect them to maintain that. Another question for you. It's been proposed by one of our communities, gated communities, to build new short-term rental houses in their facility as part of their business plan, specifically CCNC on this. And maybe a different part of this we need to discuss. Are they going to be allowed to build those, or do we have to have some special provision of that?
Require a rezoning.
So basically, this is going to prohibit them without a rezoning type of thing that occurs.
Well,
Yeah,
they'd have
This
to
is
come
the
in
not-
for a rezoning, just like the club came in for their rezoning.
that's right.
For their,
Just a zoning question.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
mean, and this is under the this is all under the non-conforming banner, not the permitted use banner, so.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you for asking that.
Actually, one alibi here, sorry. This seems like it's going to be a beast to enforce. Are we going to, at some point in time, discuss this with staff here on exactly how we're going to enforce this, what's going to be required? Do we need additional personnel? I mean, it just seems like there's a lot of stuff here.
I don't envision us aggressively tracking all this information on the 500 or so existing short-term rentals units out there. This is going to be, realistically, this is going to be things that come to our attention. And when they're brought to our attention, we'll be compelled to act.
And
Language.
we learned earlier about the ability technologically of companies that can assist us regarding scraping all the websites and determining what's what. And since we will have a fixed amount of short-term rentals that have the certificate, hopefully, we'll know if an address pops up and it's not it doesn't match to one of those certificates. So then that would be someone who's sort of out of order.
As a new one.
Right.
Yeah, for example, yeah.
Okay.
So Jane, where were we in your questions then? Have we finished two? We were in section C1, I think. Darren, did you have a question on that still, or what was your point there?
I had that one little bit of language to add to sentence,
The nature and extent, that discussion?
second, the first sentence, which I read out before, upon the property owner providing documentation acceptable to the village, establishing the legal existence, and I would add nature and extent of the original non-conforming use.
It's number 3 on your handout. Yeah,
That's correct, that's fine.
it works for me. Anybody else have a question about that?
No, I'm okay.
That's agreed. Let's go on to the next one. Jane, do you have question number 4 off your sheet? You want to carry on?
Really, the only change now is going to be the cessation. That's going to be the,
My next question is on current subsection F. I just want to make sure that it doesn't get lost because it was on where a page turned over, and that we remember to renumber it and include that in the documentation saying we're going to
that will all
renumber it.
get handled.
Right, got it.
And then on subsection G, I had two items.
Nobody had any other comments on those other paragraphs?
Now,
Didn't hear you.
the only thing I'd raise is, and I know we're going to readdress it, is the 365-day thing. So,
We'll get to that, yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
it's in the copy here, that's
This,
all.
this 365 is not
No.
the cessation of use. This is within 365, come get your permit.
Okay, thank you.
Wait. No, this would be this is the cessation of use. This section G is cessation of use.
E, okay, yeah, I was referring back to this.
I
I'm
know,
sorry.
that's what I was, triggered my mind, so go ahead.
Yeah,
So that is really all, that is everything for the non.
Second,
the
did we get to G?
We're at it now.
We're
We're
just
G
talking
now.
about-
Have something on G.
Yes.
Okay, so in the fourth sentence, it says if a dwelling unit is not used as a short-term rental, I'd like to add if a dwelling unit is not used as a non-conforming short-term rental, because that implies the lawfulness of the non-conforming use.
we're in the section of the PDO that only pertains to nonconformities.
If it's not
So-
used as a,
We can add it.
If it's not used-
redundant, but we can add it.
well,
Yeah.
so let's say you have a non-conforming rental, or non-conforming that you, and you've got a pattern of operation for it, nature and extent of use that says you use it during the winter for that purpose. You come in and you say, well, I used it in the summer. That's not part of your pattern.
I think that, talking about, staff is going to have to enforce this.
sorry?
Staff is going to have to enforce this, right? And staff typically tries to be reasonable. And
Right,
as long
right.
as they, just for that example, I'm just going to point this out. If something like that happened, and instead of the owner renting it for 30 days in the winter, they shifted their model, so it's going to be 30 days in the summer, that's not an intensification, and we're not going to fuss with that. We're just not.
They shouldn't be
picking
going-
fights that we don't need to
Shouldn't
pick.
be going from seasonal to year-round.
No, it was 30 days in the winter versus 30 days in the summer was the point. I thought that was the example you,
I still think that the word non-conforming is appropriate there, even if you're
we can
interpreting
put it there.
non-conforming.
Yeah.
All right, what's that?
Non-conforming.
It is the non-conforming section, but having that word won't hurt.
Yeah.
That's what I had on 2.3.2.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Any other comments?
So the question on the 365 days was clarified by Jeff Sanborn, I think.
Okay,
All right.
so we need some work
So-
on that a little bit?
All right, so now we've taken section 2.3.2. We've gone through every proposed change. We have agreement on what's to happen there. And we'll move on to, excuse me?
We're not total agreement because we still have to, I think we still have to play with that this 365-day period thing that there's some concern about.
Jeff, did you want to comment on that?
I'll,
As I've observed in a couple of conversations over the last couple of days on
Yeah.
that topic, I think staff is certainly willing to continue to investigate whether or not there's another approach that would work. We just haven't found it yet, so we're all ears.
What other options were discarded?
we haven't, well, because this is relatively new and we've only worked on this in the last probably, 2 weeks or 3
Yeah.
weeks or so, we haven't had a lot of staff time to do any research.
Yeah, it's not that options were discarded, it was thinking about the examples. And the example I gave you is a situation which would set us up for a court case that we would lose. And the result of losing that court case would be that language would be stricken.
But 365 days or more, when you hit the 365 days, seems like that's your threshold. I mean, why say 365 days or more? Why not just stop at 300? I mean, Patrick, you were concerned about 365 days.
You could say or more. I think the interpretation would be the same.
Yeah, I know, I think Lydia, you caught something I missed there. I didn't, see the or more. If a dwelling unit is not used as a short-term rental for 365 days, I guess.
But you cross that threshold, I mean,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, another way you could say that
it's the
is if
same interpretation, yeah.
Yeah.
if a dwelling is not used as a short-term rental for more than 364 days,
I will say that it's consistent with with the other language
Yeah.
in that provision where we talk about, it says, if a non-conforming use is discontinued for 120 consecutive days or more, then the property, so we wrote that based on what the existing ordinance language is. That doesn't mean it can't be improved or changed. I'm just telling you where the genesis of that.
Actually, now that I look at it, I suppose if we don't learn about this until the 400th day, we've covered ourselves with or more.
May not come to our attention until it's been 400 days or
I'm fine.
500 days. So
I'm fine with it.
fine.
So another question for you here on that specific aspect. We're in pretty good times here in Pinehurst, and a lot of people want to come visit. Let's say we go into a pretty significant recession, and the free market makes it so we're not able to rent all these short-term rentals. And so these short-term rental folks, they're still advertising, but there's nobody coming into them. Are we going to define the use of the short-term rental as just advertising to rent it and it's a downturn, or do they have to actually spend a night in there?
Well, it's not the same situation as a long-term commercial lease, for example, where you either have a lease in place for a year or 5 years or something, or you don't. It is by nature transitory, it seems to me. So, and all you need is one rental within the cessation period to do it. You don't have to find a tenant who's going to be there for a whole year, which is somebody for a
Yeah, I don't think you
weekend.
understand my question.
So I don't think there's the same kind of a need for the advertising situation.
Okay, my point on this, Jane, is that either if I'm in a situation where the free market is now keeping me from being able to rent it, because before we had, let's just say, 15,000 people coming in to visit, now we've only got 3,000 people because of a recession. So you're still trying to use it as a short-term rental. It's just not being used because the market is keeping you from doing it.
That's where natural attrition comes in.
I believe there's some case law on that where some thought was that the nonconformity would be lost if they weren't trying to rent it.
Trying to,
But
that's
if they were
right,
trying
yeah.
to rent it, I believe the case law supported that person, even though they couldn't do it within the time period, they were making all efforts to advertisements, things like that.
Yeah, if sometimes it's helpful to compare it to a different type of an operation or a different type of a non-conforming use. Let's say it was a retail use, it was a non-conforming use. As long as the doors were open, it would continue to be a non-conforming use as long as, even if they weren't getting any customers, right? They're trying to stay in business, yeah.
I'm satisfied with the answer. Thank you.
Yeah, I get it.
No, I disagree with that.
I think that,
disagree with that.
I think there's court precedence that says we have to interpret it that way.
And you cited some case law
There is some case law out there on that. I know there is, because
that supports the way we have it written now.
Jeff,
With Jeff Morgan's,
Jeff's discussion point, there is.
I think we have to leave it this way. I don't think we can fiddle with that.
I will find you some of that case law.
Okay,
All right, so I think we're in agreement to leave that as it is.
I'm fine with it.
Okay.
Next section, revocation of development permit. Again, we're not proposing any changes to that at this point. So unless you want to give us some direction on any changes to 4.2.12.
You've rewritten this a little bit over the last
This
few weeks
section-
on 4.2.12? No.
Nope. If it was a minor edit for,
Okay,
The first sentence had a couple of word changes, I think, Darren, is what it was.
right.
Yeah. You added the pursuant to General Statutes 160D.
Oh, okay.
Darren, remind me, where is an appeal made on the revocation issue?
the appeal would be made to the Board of Adjustment, and then after that, the court system.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that's section 232, and including 4212. Moving on, Darren.
Nothing else in there. And this is table 8.518. Kelly,
Okay.
yeah, can you zoom in, please?
I think we'll have quite a bit of discussion on this one, but my recommendation for discussion is that we don't, that we do not allow new STRs in RMF. We'll start with that. So RMF would be in the same category as single family. I think as some of us mentioned earlier, multifamily is where we have the majority of our short-term rentals. There's concern at the planning board about affordability and availability of housing. This is one of the few places that still is a relatively affordable location. And I think continuing to allow STRs there is not in the best interest of the overall program policy that we have. So I would recommend we do not include and have an X, therefore, in RMF. There may be some other, I think there will be some other changes, but here is also where you've added the hotel category, and maybe you want to talk a bit about that as well.
Go ahead.
Well, I think based on some of the conversation or some of the recent developments where we've seen the resort come up with some of the cottage-style developments, that we thought that adding this as a potential for if somebody else wanted to do a similar style cottage style development, that this would be the zoning district that they could pinpoint to.
I think, given the past request by the club on their own lodge cottages issue, and knowing the interest of the Country Club of North Carolina, I think it's wise that we put an X in that box.
Yeah, there have been some, just more generically or more generally, there have been some conversations about the potential of creating what you might describe as a solely short-term rental neighborhood or two in different places of the village. Some developers might be interested in doing that. And this would be a way to accommodate that, where you could rezone it to hotel because the residential structures are also permitted in a hotel. And with the X here, the short-term rentals could also be in that district.
Yeah, I get it.
And it would, I mean, the nice thing about that is you wind up with short-term rentals that are all together and not having impacts on
Neighbors.
neighborhoods.
Other comments, reactions
Yeah.
to 8.51 on the table of uses?
I do. I originally thought it would be helpful to have a zone or two where short-term rentals were allowed for the purpose of rezoning or conditional rezoning in the future. And I originally suggested the village mixed use and village commercial zones. But I hear what staff is saying in recommending that the hotel zone and possibly the village commercial zone be the ones so designated. They both allow hotel uses now. And looking at the village residential, village mixed use, and village cottage professional, in those zones, B&B houses are allowed. And that seems to me to be sufficient lodging in those zones. And B&Bs are regulated by state statute and by the PDO, and they have on-site management. So I think those are preferable lodging types of uses for those zones. I agree with the mayor that the multifamily zone is not a good place to have additional short-term rentals beyond what it already has. Those zones only contain about 17% of the village's housing stock, but 54% of existing short-term rentals are there now. And that means that our most affordable housing units are being repurposed as vacation rentals. And in accordance with the comments that were made by the Planning and Zoning Board, that's probably better not to make that a zone where more of our housing stock is taken away from purchasers or long-term renters for full-time use.
Yeah, I'll just comment on, and I made it earlier, when I reviewed the Planning and Zoning Board public hearing, and then their discussion afterward when they went a week later on the vote, there were a couple of members there that were felt very strongly. At that time, they were reviewing the amortization issue and just the banning in the single-family residential, but they were very concerned about this migration of investors from single-family area to the residential multifamily. And one person on the board even used the example of that a lot of our caddies and teachers and other people actually live there. And they were worried about that. And when you think about it, if you could, you can no longer purchase a $1.5 million home in a single-family residential district, but you had $1.5 million available, you could go over to the condo area and you could purchase 5 condos. And the upkeep is less. There's no issue about expansion. They're set. There's no issue about parking. It's set. So probably very attractive to an investor. But I don't think it's wise for the village to take what's probably its most affordable housing and putting it in a precarious situation where they become overly attractive to investors. So I would agree with the mayor on that. I like the hotel one. Jane, I'm not sure, what were you saying about, I guess we have an X now in Village Commercial and VMU. Were you saying you wanted to change one of those or keep them?
Right, I think as we look at the landscape of how we're trying to work with short-term rentals, if we take amortization off the table, I think that probably our most appropriate zones for having a couple of zones where short-term rentals are permitted as of right in order that we have the flexibility for rezoning later on should some application come up. The hotel and the village commercial zones are the best candidates for those because hotels are allowed in both of those now, instead of village residential, village mixed use, or village cottage professional, where I would not allow new ones going forward. Existing ones would be grandfathered.
Aaron, you may not know off the top of your head, but are residential structures permitted in VC?
VC, I do not believe so. Standalone?
Yeah, single family, like, for example. But they are in VMU, right?
Correct. No. The only thing that are allowed in village commercial would be village commercial dwelling mixed use and hotel, as was just discussed.
And in VMU?
BMU, you get single-family, two-family. So you got single-family, two-family, multiple-family dwelling, townhouses, and dwelling mixed
If
use.
there was a desire to eliminate one of those two, I would recommend eliminating VC, not VMU.
Well, but then you're getting a proliferation of new short-term rentals.
Well, but I don't, how much VMU do we have? I'm
much.
I'm trying to pull up in my mind the zoning map, and I remember just a little tiny something here or there.
BMU is pretty much all of Village Place.
Village Place was the area.
Which is a very small footprint.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, right.
And you're adopting a small area plan that's going to govern that development.
But still, when you have a whole lot of short-term rentals in a more thickly settled urban-type setting like that, then I think you run the risk of creating de facto hotels, which are not managed.
But you're in a commercial
Yeah.
area.
I'm sorry?
You're in a commercial area.
You could have a hotel there.
No,
You-
but they're.
By right, you could have a
De
hotel there, right?
facto hotels
Yeah.
would not have on-site management. They wouldn't have the regulation that a true commercial hotel or bed and breakfast house has. And the city of Raleigh, actually, a couple of years ago, established caps in its commercial zones so that that wouldn't happen. You couldn't have more than such and such a percentage. Of course, that you can't use caps anymore. But I think that we're better off allowing the bed and breakfast home use for anybody who wants to do lodging in the village mixed use zone, and having short-term rentals in village commercial.
So Village Mixed Use currently has B&Bs allowed,
That's right.
and it would in the hotel, and as hotel as well. And here it's checked for short-term rentals.
There's plenty of room to put lodging in the VMU zone without going to short-term rentals.
Yeah, you're probably right. Well, let me be sure, though, on the chart, I'm looking for the hotel. Oh, yeah, the hotel is there in VMU. Am I right?
Yes.
Yes. you're
Okay,
correct.
I'm fine with that.
Where are the B&Bs allowed? It'd be VCP, VR, they're allowed in those districts, correct? So it says so on the list here, but just double check.
Where's what allowed?
Bed and breakfast.
Oh, yeah.
Bed and breakfast would be allowed in R210, hotel,
Yeah.
VCP, VR, and VMU.
And to our knowledge, we don't have any bed and breakfast at the moment, maybe one in some place?
Not aware of any.
Okay, all right.
A very interesting point. I didn't realize that. Okay.
I'm sorry, Pat.
I said, no, that was an interesting point. I don't know why I didn't think of asking the question of how many we have, and the answer is we may have none at this point.
So the issue is, do we have it in VC or VMU? Jeff, you're suggesting if we allow short-term rentals, it is better in VMU. We seem to have some disagreement on that, but
Because VC doesn't permit single-family residential structures to begin with.
yeah,
But VMU
that's got to go.
does.
I really think that it's not a good idea to put them in the VMU, because there are other lodging opportunities there which would be better managed, better run than a proliferation of short-term rentals.
And I understand that a hotel could go in the VMU.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then I'm okay with what Jane's saying. I thought, I didn't want us to eliminate the options of hotels in VMU, so we.
I don't think that's on the table here.
No,
Yeah.
I just need to clarify that in my own mind. That's-
Well, VMU, if we leave it as it is, would have B&Bs are allowed, hotel would be allowed, and so would short-term rentals.
Yeah.
So I think Jane's point is, that's a lot of residential, that's a lot of lodging or residential ability there in that district.
I think that the possibility of a proliferation of short-term rentals which are not on-site managed, creating a de facto hotel situation would not be good in Village Place compared to having a real hotel or real bread and breakfast houses.
Well,
It does seem to me that all of this discussion has been about the impact of these short-term rentals in our single-family neighborhoods. VMU is not a single-family neighborhood. You're not going to have the impacts because it's already commercial in nature.
I think what I'm thinking about is I never envisioned much single-family dwellings in Village Place there.
That was, the other part of my point was, we have a small area plan that's going to govern that development, and there's just not a lot there to begin with, so.
So maybe we could take it out. I mean, I'd be shocked if there's single-family homes placed in Village Place. I mean, that is, so, and that's really where the short-term rentals would be,
Can't do
as
it in
opposed to a
VC.
hotel.
We can't do it in VC. We need to have it in at least 2 locations. I'm talking about STRs. So it kind of boils down to hotel and
hotel and someone else.
VMU, I think.
Well, I think the other point of consideration is if you're building a mixed-use development, say in Village Place, and there's one building owner who's going to build that, they have an interest in those units not probably becoming short-term rentals, they're going to be leasing them out to whoever is like an apartment use. So I don't think that, because they're going to have a specific lease with that tenant, and there's going to probably be some provisions that they can't sublease, do things like that. At least that's in my experience how most of these are run. But that doesn't mean it's going to happen that way.
All right. Jeff Morgan, do you have any comment on this as to, well, anything on this schedule? Or
I'm
specific-
going to support the short-term rentals in all the areas, so.
That's what I thought, but I wanted, sorry.
So I
Lydia,
think
do you-
I think we're barking up the wrong tree, but go ahead, it was about you three.
All right. So I think we are better off to deal with the short-term rentals, therefore, in the hotel district, which we'll be adding, and in VMU, because we can't do it in VC, and I think we have opportunities there that will be fair. So, and we're taking it off of RMF.
Not my preference, but.
Yeah, so then we'd be down to 2 areas that we've okayed.
That's correct.
I'm fine. It's not, like I say, I will be surprised of a short-term rental
Yeah.
in Village Place. I mean, it's just
It'll be in hotel, and it'll be in VMU,
something bigger,
not in
I
VC.
hope.
So
Any others?
What I'm hearing is 3 council members are suggesting remove it in
RMF,
RMF and in VC.
Correct.
Correct.
Take it out of those 2. Allow it in hotel and VMU.
And Patrick, I'd be surprised also. The invisible hand of the free market's an amazing thing.
They are. That's,
I'm
Now,
sorry, what did you say?
he was quoting
I said
Adam
I'd be
Smith.
surprised because the invisible hand of the free market is an amazing thing.
Now, Darren, also on this, we need to take off homestays, which I just want to confirm that we're doing that. We're going to keep the definition, I think, later, but we're going to take it off as you earlier advised us, correct?
sure, unless you're going to put X's across the board in the residential districts, or you're willing to. Otherwise, I would pull it off for now, and we can come back to it.
I agree.
It doesn't stop the use from occurring, it just, this would prohibit the use.
Right. Are there any other
Can I
questions?
ask one other question, or suggest you consider one other thing? We're not aware of any existing short-term rentals in HDOP or VC. But if there are, maybe we should have an SR there.
Justin,
Right? Because otherwise, we're going to wind up giving them the,
that's right. No, you're right.
yeah, I think they'll come forward for their permit, and we won't be able to apply SR 9.
So we need to put SR in OP.
Across the board, every district, really,
Oh, okay.
because we don't know.
All right, Darren, you got that?
Yes.
Council agree?
Yes.
Okay. Any other changes, corrections to 8.5.1, table of uses? Got it? Let's move on.
All right, this would be SR9, the creation of SR9, and as you can, well, by the presentation, we've made some significant changes to that, so we can start with SR9-1.
Are we supposed to, are you going to read this first, or we're just going to go? Okay.
Unless you want me to read it again.
I had a couple.
Do I have a handout?
It's
Oh, yeah.
it's on my sheet. It's
Okay.
Do you have that?
Oh, there it is. It's on top. Never mind. All right, got it.
So in the second sentence of section 1, I would add, again, the word non-conforming. All non-conforming short-term rental dwelling units. And then my other question about SR9 has to do with subsection J. And I think we need to clarify this a little bit because I've been stumped by it a couple of times. Accessory dwelling units may be permitted for short-term rental where short-term rental, I would add, short-term rentals and accessory dwelling units are permitted by right.
There's two things. Accessory dwelling units are not permitted by right in all districts. Accessory dwelling units are currently permitted by right in areas that are zoned with a historic district overlay.
I'm not catching what you're saying.
Accessory dwelling units are not permitted as a right in all zoning districts.
Right.
They're permitted as a right in the historic district, but they're not permitted as a right everywhere else. Everywhere else, you need to get a special use permit for those. Just clarifying.
So
But Darren, to clarify, when the language, where permitted by right, is that intended to modify accessory dwelling units or short-term rental? Which use is that where permitted by right referring to? I think that's the nature of Jane's question, or
Right.
similar to it.
because
Well,
J isn't supposed to expand the places that short-term rentals are allowed beyond what's in table 8.5.1A, is it? No. So I just want, and presumably these, J is talking about new short-term rentals that arise lawfully after the effective date of our new ordinance, right? It's not talking about old grandfathered ones.
correct. I mean, this was written, I believe, when we had, well, first of all, we may have missed that, but this was written when we thought there would be more districts, that there would be new short-term rental units permitted by right. Now, if we get down to the level of it's only going to be in the H, and it's going to be in potentially the VMU district, right? Those were the two. I'm not sure if there's going to be a lot of accessory dwelling units
Yeah.
in
It may
those
not
two
even need
districts.
J.
Pardon me?
May not even need J.
Based on what I'm hearing from table, what the support is on table 8.51A, I'm not sure if it is.
But if we have it, I think it should say where short-term rentals are permitted as a matter of right. And make that clear.
Oh, you're adding the word there, just a word.
The SR, oh, I see what you're
So,
saying, because the
that's
SR
on my
applies to
sheet.
the other districts as well. A related question, Darren, are we aware of, you probably don't know this off the top of your head, but is it possible that we have non-conforming accessory dwellings out there that are part of this
Well,
puzzle?
J doesn't
Homestays?
cover non-conforming ones, does it?
Well, that's what I,
Yeah.
where permitted by right, which are we referring to here? The accessory dwelling or the
Well, what
a short-term rental?
What that would do is if it was allowed, the way it's written, and the way it's written is an accessory dwelling unit may be permitted for short-term rental. So that would set up a situation where it's permitted by right that if it was in a single-family district, that both the single-family district and the accessory dwelling unit could be used for short-term rental purposes. And I don't think that was the intent going into it.
I think if my reading of SR 9 is right, and it may not be, accessory dwelling units, which have never been short-term rentals before, but now, subsequent to the effective date of the ordinance, want to become short-term rentals, are limited by this term to only be able to be used as short-term rentals where short-term rentals are permitted as of right.
That's, I mean, that's by definition, just going back to the table.
But I
That
just
you
want to
can't have a
make sure
new
that it
short-term rental
clearly
anywhere
says that.
unless short-term rental is permitted by right,
Right.
right? So that's,
Because I would assume,
this doesn't add anything unless it's saying that accessory dwelling units have to be permitted by right in that district in order for it to be a short-term rental.
Right.
A new short-term rental.
this doesn't supersede the X
Does not.
marks.
No, it does not.
It cannot.
And I would assume that if we're talking about grandfathered properties,
They're grandfathered, not really, I mean, yeah.
but a grandfathered property that has a principal dwelling and an accessory dwelling would have to have established short-term rentals in both, right?
Because
Separately.
they couldn't intensify.
So that doesn't apply, that's not J.
No.
I just think if we really need it, it should be clear.
So to
That
clarify, I would recommend, Darren, unless this is not what you intended with this language, rewording it to say accessory dwelling units may be permitted for short-term rental where accessory dwelling units are permitted by right in Table 8, blah, 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 blah. Does that make sense?
It does.
I think that's within a word or two of what you proposed.
Where short-term rentals are permitted by right.
Where accessory dwelling units are permitted by right. Because it's already, you already can't have a short-term rental unless it's permitted by right.
Yeah,
Okay,
You can't have a new one anyway, so.
right.
The only way this adds anything is, right? So if the interpretation is what you're suggesting, this is redundant. We don't even need it.
okay.
But Jeff, your wording, I think, is appropriate then.
Well, I mean, unless that was not what the
Right, and
drafter's
it deals
intent
with the
was.
issue that,
And I vaguely recall that this came out of a discussion we had months ago with council, but I can't recall what that was,
And we could.
motivation was.
And we could have
Yeah.
reworked it.
Yeah.
and
Okay.
It lost something.
but I don't want to leave any loose ends here. We either have some wording or we don't, so.
It would have been a lot easier to do amortization.
It would have been lunch. I mean, we've said that.
But-
We can leave
but
it
this
and it doesn't
is-
hurt.
This is what we need to do to sort through if we're setting that aside, so.
I mean, we can leave it in, it doesn't, I mean, the practical effect of what you're potentially doing this evening, or in 2 weeks, it doesn't really have a practical effect because you're not going to allow any potentially not going to allow any new short-term rental units in any of the districts by right.
So you're going to change that wording then?
I'll change it, yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
we'll make that clear. I think we're all right with that. Okay?
Just so that the average human being, you know,
Make it as clear as
coming in for the first
possible.
time can read it and figure out what it means. And you know what it means. But
No, I
Not everybody-
understand.
not everybody does.
I understand.
Okay, any other comments on the SRs?
okay,
So we didn't make it, like I said, we didn't make any real major changes below that, other than adding some of the state code references, adding the operable, and anything. cooking facilities. There are no major changes with the exception of the discussion that we had previously on section K about maybe better defining K. In residential zoning districts, short-term rentals shall not be used for special events as defined by section 10.2. And now we know some of the weaknesses in that particular definition, or other commercial type large gatherings. I could strike it altogether.
Wait a minute, you said strike which? You've already
K.
struck K.
K.
You had it someplace else, right?
No, this is the place. This is the only place in the development standard. This is what, we had some difficulty when we were talking about this at the Planning and Zoning Board, and we continue to have a little bit of difficulty talking about it right here.
Well, if we strike it, what do we lose?
You strike the potential that we write up, if we're issuing a notice of violation and we're seeing a series of events or things advertised at a short-term rental, that we could refer to this as a potential violation of the PDO.
This is for the repeat offender or the one-time issue?
That requires interpretation. So I'm sure that if we see a one-time, we use discretion.
Right.
The vast majority of short-term rentals, existing short-term rentals, are in residential neighborhoods. And it seems to me that a house in a residential neighborhood, for it to be used for a fundraising event or some other commercial type large event, is really out of keeping with residential character
Jane?
of the surrounding neighborhood. It's just not appropriate. It's one thing to have somebody go in and temporarily stay there, eat, sleep, and wash, and so forth. It's something else to have a great big gala or other commercial type gathering there in that neighborhood. It's very out of keeping. So I would leave K alone.
Well, I'm just going to disagree with you on this idea of a fundraising event being out of character. I think fundraising events, and they don't have to be political, they can be for charities or hospitals or whatever. I've been to them in single-family residential homes, and they're not every night. They're not in the same home. They occur from time to time, whether it's for, I don't know, Little League or whatever it is, or a political event. I don't think we want to get into the business of having everybody who's going to have a little fundraising event in their backyard having to have a permit. We had an event at our home a few weeks ago. We needed to get a permit because we were going to have a lot of people, and we got it. But I don't want us to interfere with what I consider sort of the regular usage of someone's home for a charitable or fundraising event. And if it turns into some sort of super destination for these, we can find another way to address it. That's just my feeling.
To that point, it might be helpful to recall that we have the new unruly gathering language in the municipal code.
The one we adopted back in June, yes.
I concur with you, Patrick. It's more free clinic survives on fundraising events at people's houses. We have all kinds of organizations that do good work in our community that are supported with it. I think you can eliminate that without having any ramifications.
And there's all kinds of venues to have those events. It
Why don't
doesn't
we
have
want-
to be in a residential neighborhood.
But it
Want to
can.
dictate where people can have their events. I agree, it doesn't happen every night. To Patrick's point, to Jeff's point, they're organizations, they're candidates who rely on these being in homes, but it doesn't happen every night. I guess I can't believe we want to
I think
micromanage something like this.
most of these SDR owners aren't going to rent their place for one night.
Yeah. And you may
mo-
have somebody
I
come
can't
in.
say that exclusively, but I
Yeah,
think.
but
you know,
most of the
yeah,
charity events are not at STRs. They're
Yeah.
at someone's home.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Well,
just-
that's not quite
happening-
true.
It's
because,
happening now in our neighborhoods.
There are homes that are being used just for that. And that's what we're trying to avoid. But we have the language, as you pointed out, elsewhere on the large gatherings and whatnot. So I think that,
Yeah, I mean, it might be another way to look at this as well is, okay, if you don't allow it in the short-term rentals, it's just going to happen in the house next door. You know, it's going to happen to somebody, in somebody's residence instead. So the impact's the same, I think, to the extent that these are things that happen in our community anyway.
yeah. So I'm sorry, is there a desire to take this out?
I would like to take it, I would like to leave it in
Mm-hmm.
the way it is.
Okay. Pat, Lydia, Jeff Morgan?
Take it out.
I just don't see I don't see the need for it. I just don't see the need for it.
You have three of us that want to take it out.
Yeah, I agree. Let's take it out. Okay. Moving on.
Moving on, we have the revocation section that we
strikeouts.
propose to remove.
What was L, just for the contact information?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Contact information, yeah, that's there. We need that.
We may need to clarify that, contact information for who?
Yeah,
Responsible person.
yeah. We
Property
need a little-
manager or owner or both or something.
We
Yeah.
can come up with something.
Yeah, I think we need to define that a little bit better.
We can work on that.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Everything else is deleted below that, I believe?
Correct? Revocation, compliance with the standards, compliance period, and the amortization. So we're proposing to remove all those sections.
Yeah, it's gone.
And then the
Now
definitions.
the definitions, go ahead.
We're not proposing any changes to the definitions at
Right.
this time.
And we need to keep the homestay definition because eventually we'll deal with that. So we have the definition set. We can discuss that at another time as we do some further research on that whole issue, which is quite involved.
So I got,
Okay. So I think we're moving on then to the ordinance documents and the whereases. We've come through the other major documents that you presented to us. And I believe we'll have some comments on that. You're going to draw that up? I note there's already been a couple of small typos and things added in this text, going back to the earlier draft.
Hey, Darren, I had a resident ask me to ask you to explain to the public the purpose of the whereas clauses.
This is really the preamble.
It's
sets-
important to
sets the
outline
base.
the intent of the ordinance.
kind of, yeah,
Yeah, I had a
under the
discussion.
police powers, sorry.
No, I was going to say, I had a discussion with someone on that also, literally today, and I recall that we, as a council, were advised many months ago that it was important that we have a strong preamble in what we were undertaking. And so I actually think we should beef this up a little bit, but putting that aside, we need a preamble. We need to state our case. That's my comment.
Okay, yeah,
The
just somebody out there, I guess, who had not heard that discussion wanted to hear in this meeting the purpose of the preamble, so.
It's really the declaration of why, the public policy decision that you're making, this is the reasoning why you're making this decision. It's the proclamation, kind of the proclamation, what you're doing, acting as a council. And including some of the various situations, conditions about why you're doing it. And then they're not all very lengthy. This one is very lengthy at this point.
Now, in the title, we say, to address short-term rentals, homestays, and permit revocation. Should we take homestays out of that?
I think we've included a definition, so it needs to be in the title. But
Referring to, Lydia?
the word homestay in the title, it's a good question. We have it as a definition, but we haven't set out where the land uses would be.
It does partially address homestays, just not fully, so.
Okay. Yeah, it's up there.
Now, just from my point of view, having gone through,
We do need to modify that, though, because it also updates, it includes a new permitting requirement, a new certificate of nonconformance requirement for all future nonconformities, Chapter 2.
so what wording do we want to put there then? Not permit revocation, which is what we have in the,
Let us wordsmith that one in.
all right.
Wouldn't that just fall under to address short-term rentals?
No, because it addresses more than short-term rentals.
Okay. Got it.
So I worked on, as you know, I worked on a preamble, and I sent around something that I cobbled together actually a couple of months ago now. But I took another stab at it over the weekend, updated it a bit, and I've got my copies, such as they are, that I can hand out. Pass them down and give one to Darren, and pass them down.
Why don't you go ahead and pass those out? I have a couple of, I'd like to draw attention to a couple of the sections already while you're doing that. And again, I say there were a couple of wording changes marked in red that you had, Darren, in some of these pages, so that's fine, that's clear. Looking at, I think it would be the bottom of page 2 in the preamble. The last whereas has to do with where short-term rentals are allowed, and we've just changed that. So we would need to update that. This is the whereas short-term rentals are more appropriate in the village commercial and village mixed-use zoning districts. So that's one that needs to be changed and hotel added in there. I'd say.
Where you at?
Well, on the way I've printed it out, it's on the bottom of page 2. I don't know how that'll work for you, but it's the whereas having to do with short-term rentals are more appropriate in village commercial, village mixed use. It'd be about,
Oh, yeah, on page 3. All right.
well, let's see.
Yep, well, you're right.
Yeah. So that's going to have to be updated, include hotel and the other changes.
Yeah, the bottom of page 2 is talking about single-family uses.
Well, that's the other part, yeah.
I think maybe it's formatted different the way you printed it out.
Say again?
Maybe your
It could be.
yours is formatted differently when you printed it out than mine.
That's tough.
It's the next whereas after that. If you're looking at the whereas and it goes through the single-family land uses in all the zoning districts, it'd be the next whereas.
Yeah, okay, yep, where they're more appropriate.
Yeah, well, maybe we changed that, just so we need to reflect that in this.
Hotel
Yeah,
instead of VC.
right.
I would like to address, are we through with that one? To me, it seems important that these whereas clauses be based on some fact, and there are a couple of places that I think the fact is incorrect. This is the middle of page 2, where we talk about data provided by host compliance that showed a 21% growth of listings from 2021 to 22. I believe that number is not a good number.
Where are we on that?
On page 2, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fifth complete whereas clause. I think that's an exaggerated number.
What is the number?
I'm sorry, what?
What is the number?
I don't know the number. I know host compliance, it's my understanding, and Phil Sunya, who's sitting right here, explained it to me, and he can go into way more detail than I can, but they sweep in all of 28374, and Pinehurst is not all of 28374. It also, the platforms have been expanded, AirDNA, which I guess, I don't, Phil knows this stuff better than I do, but the platform for gathering this has been greatly expanded, which gives a greater number. And to me, it's important that this be an accurate number. I don't know the number. I mean, I wish you guys would talk to Phil and kind of work through it just to see what the accurate number might be. But I believe that number is exaggerated. I believe the number before that also is exaggerated.
Which is the number before it? We've got the 40,
I mean, the
Where are
40,
you?
Can we just zero in on that one and try to address
Okay.
that first?
the 21% growth, isn't that what you said?
yes,
Okay.
but I don't know the number because I don't know this.
We may not be able to define a number that everybody agrees on. So I'm wondering if we might be better off just saying that, whereas the use of dwelling units for short-term rental land use has increased significantly within the village over the past 5 years, period.
I'm fine with that.
And I don't know the number, so I can't agree to that. But if you guys can agree with it, then that's my concern, that number is not accurate. And it's been an important number in all the discussions. And below that, we talk about approximately 43% of short-term rental units are located within areas planned and zoned for single family. I don't know if that's a good number. And again,
That number I feel confident about because we had somebody go up to the Moore County Records Department and
It says approximately, doesn't say precisely.
yeah,
Yeah.
And we ran that off of GIS too, so I think that was a number based on.
Yeah, it was true at a point in time,
it was, yeah, not,
and it's very recent, so I'm pretty comfortable that's a reasonable number. Taking out the 20,
I think Jeff, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
taking out the 21% growth idea, which Jeff said, and just saying substantial, I think that's that's wise.
Yeah.
But the 43%, I think, is
Well, I
we have
guess,
that.
since we seem to be heading toward a solution that prohibits them also in RMF, maybe this should be updated to include the RMF numbers.
Yeah,
Well,
because there are other places in here where RMF, yeah, it's going to be adjusted.
the RMF numbers were where the majority of them were, so we could,
Between
if it's
single-family
43,
and
then that's
RMF, they're almost
57.
all.
Right?
But what's the point of even having that whereas?
Well, I'd like to suggest that we change references. to-
Whereas almost all of the short-term rentals are where homes are.
Yeah, that's a good point.
This preamble was put together when we thought
That's right,
we
yeah.
were going in a little different direction.
I'm just suggesting an
But it is
update
a-
that might be more
it
appropriate
is
now.
A great framework for work, starting with. So my thought would be to change references to single-family neighborhoods throughout to residential neighborhoods. And then as we come to paragraphs that talk about specific zones, we may have to amend those, or we may have to add some more specific zones, like the hotel zone and the RMU and so forth. And I think also we should put a little bit more detail in there than we have now on the overall study that the village did, because the village really did do an enormous amount of work. And we could detail that a little bit.
What study did the village do, Jane? Jane, I'm sorry, over here. You said the village has done an enormous amount of study.
Yes,
But,
yes.
well, I know it's been a long time, like 9 or 10 months, but what do you consider an enormous amount of study?
Well, 10 months of holding meetings at which the public were invited to come and give comments, listening to those comments, listening to, reading, and crunching the email information that was provided to us by our own citizens and people from out of town, the articles that they provided to us that were written about towns and other places. read those. We read, at least I did, short-term rental ordinances for other towns in North Carolina and some other parts of the country. We read the School of Government's book on short-term rentals and blogs on short-term rentals that came out. We read the
Wilmington.
case and the blogs that were written about that. And we've also read, at least I have, recent cases that have come out in other parts of the country having to do with short-term rentals, and some older ones as well.
I would add, Jane, input from the North Carolina League of Municipalities, too.
Right, demographic information from the state. We've had Moore County tax record information. We've had information from the platforms that we can read to, where are they? Maps have been put together to indicate where they are in the village. We've had information from the Convention and Visitors Bureau, which gets information from Air DNA and from Visit NC as to how much revenue is coming in, how much of it is attributable to short-term rentals, how much occupancy tax we're getting from short-term rentals. And of course, that's all on a calendar year basis, whereas the revenue is not, it's the other way around. We have done the ETC statistically accurate survey, which has given us information that although if you add good and excellent scores together, they say the amount of those that are excellent compared to the amount that's good changes drastically with how many STRs are perceived to be near the respondent's home.
Are perceived to be.
So we've had actually a lot of work has been done. Our staff have worked amazingly hard. I think the council members have too, and I really don't think it's fair to say that we haven't got a legal basis for what we're trying to do. We're trying to be like Prince Henry the Navigator of Portugal. In 1400 nothing, sent his ships out to look for the Spice Islands, okay? And they went down the coast of Africa trying to get around to, I don't know, Indonesia or someplace. And every night they would pull into shore and lower the anchor. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to creep down and pay as close attention as we possibly can to the law. But at the same time, we're trying to do the best we can for our community, right? And I think that if we just had one or two folks come to us and say, you know what, there was a big party at my house, or I heard my neighbor had a big party next to her house. But we've had, as Pat was saying, hundreds of people come in and send us emails. We have a body of information that tells us the patterns of behavior and how those patterns of behavior impact our residential neighborhoods. And so it's not right to say that we don't have facts. Just because somebody came in and told us at a public hearing doesn't mean it's not a fact.
I would disagree there.
Especially with the volume. So just to finish up where I was going with what I was saying here, I think we should include a reference in our preamble to the fact that I think it's fair to us to say we did, work our potato chips off on this. And I think that we should put in something about the ETC's quality of life survey. And I've put all this stuff in my little blurb as best I could, which is probably not articulated very well. But anyway, I think
Jane, I think you have
quite a bit, I'm almost done, quite a bit of data on the precipitous growth of short-term rentals in the recent last couple of years, 2 to 3 years. And we get snapshots of it at different points in time. So somebody's telling us how many there were at the end of 2021. I think we could put maybe several of those in there.
Don't go there, because I think it is true that
And-
as,
On the dates?
I also think it might be worth, I'm just throwing these out for your consideration. a reference to the restrictions, I'm almost done, this is it,
But, okay,
on regulation that our state statutes impose.
Yeah.
Because with those, and I do, speaking for myself, feel that it was short-sighted to limit our ability to make reasonable regulations on these uses. But we can't regulate the saturation of these units, of these uses within a neighborhood or on a street. We can't put a cap. We can't
Whoa,
put a
whoa,
distance
whoa, 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 whoa,
separation.
nobody said we can't put a cap.
Huh? We,
I think,
Jeff, you had a point about the dates or
No,
something.
what got stricken down in Wilmington was the methodology they used to impose a cap.
well,
Yeah.
there are aspects of this we just can't
There are.
regulate.
Yeah.
Right? So,
I think we can agree that we can make this a little more robust.
Yeah.
right.
I don't think we need to turn it into War and Peace, okay? So I am for making this more robust. And I think you, in your draft, have some excellent points that can be included.
Considered.
And that's all I'm suggesting. And perhaps the way to do this so that we make it easy on staff and Darren is we all give some quick comments and you come up with version 2 and send it around in the next, I don't know, next few days. I mean, you have the corpus of what we need to work from between what you've put together and some of the items from Jane. I do think we need to be cautious, is what Lydia said, regarding using.
I've made a note for a whereas that describes in very general terms the extensive, lengthy consideration. I'll call it consideration, right?
Yeah.
Another one that calls more direct attention to the quality of life survey.
Yep.
I think we should scratch the whereas approximately 43% of short-term rental units are located within areas planned and zoned for single-family use.
I'm fine with that. I do think the whereas that talked about, where we mentioned the other municipalities that we checked with in the state of North Carolina, our communication with the School of Government, I think that's a useful one. I think that's in yours, Jane. I also think that, I think it's important that we cite the president of the Pinehurst Resort and Country Club, the testimony he gave before this council. That's our biggest employer and our most famous employer, and the reason we have so many visitors. So I think it's a credible argument in a whereas why we are doing what we're doing.
May I make an observation? And Jeff Morgan made this observation several months ago, weeks, who knows. It is, to me, pretty clear that the ordinance that's going to come before us in a couple of weeks is going to pass 3-2. So I don't know about Jeff Morgan, but whatever the three of you want is in the whereas clauses is what's going to pass. And despite anything I might say, it's going to pass. So, I don't know how you three decide what the clauses are going to be. But whatever you three decide what the clauses will be what's going to be presented and will pass.
Well, let me add this, excuse me. I think though, Lydia, with the preamble, the whereas, right? I think this is a statement of the process we've gone through, the resources we've used and listened to, and I think that's a statement that is true and applies to all of us on the council. So I would very much, appreciate your comments and Pat's and Jane's and Jeff's, like you've just done a few minutes ago, and on raising some questions about the percentage and that sort of thing. And I think I think input from all of us is helpful here on all of the document, but especially in the whereases, the preamble. And I like the idea of making it a more robust argument. I think we've got examples of that. And there's a number of, as I was starting to do earlier, there's a number of corrections that have to be made based on the decisions of earlier tonight. So
Yeah.
exactly how we can work out that
I would just
preamble
add
process,
one other
I'm not sure.
observation, and I don't want to make too much of this, but some of this preamble, and some of the reason it needs to be strong is to help to ensure that if we are challenged in court,
That was what we were advised.
basis is laid out correctly,
Yes.
right? To that extent, the five of you, whether you agree with the provisions of the text amendment change, we all should be on board with strengthening the argument for the change.
Yes, I agree. And along what Lydia's comment is I want us to get the best product. And that's why when you made a suggestion, I agreed with it. If I want the best ideas to go into this preamble, and we may have some disagreements on what the best ideas are, but that's what we should end up with. We want a document that we can be proud of, and it should be accurate.
Well, I'm looking at one here at the bottom of page 1, the last one. It says, lower density residential development and full-time residents in neighborhoods contribute to their economic stability. I don't know what the data is for that. I mean, there's several things I look in here, and I think, what is the data for this?
Sorry, Lydia, help me
It's
out here.
Jeff, it's the bottom of page 2, whereas this area zone for single-family land use, R5, R10, R15, and it says, in the third line, the lower density residential development and full-time residents of these neighborhoods contribute to their economic stability. I don't know that that's true.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It's about character and quality of life.
I
Okay, well, I'm willing to work on, like I said, getting the best work product possible. And thank you for pointing that out. Because we can improve the language.
above there, it says the short-term rental is an undefined land use. Well, the Vacation Rental Act defines a vacation rental as residential use. So there is a statutory definition of a short-term rental. How transient land use is, I'm not sure the basis of calling them transient land use.
I'd like to say a couple points here, if I can. Referring back to Jeff's comments, which I concur with, we all represent Pinehurst. We all work for Pinehurst. And when a decision's made here, whatever that decision is, we're moving on forward to take care of Pinehurst. So I want this to be as powerful as possible to avoid any risk to Pinehurst for any litigation type issues that pop up. You made a comment before about including Mr. Paxley's comments in there and referencing the resort. I would prefer not to reference a specific business in this. I think that weakens us. And going forward with that. The other thing that you did mention, though, that I do agree with is that I think that the modality we use to try to come up with a strong preamble is probably better served, a lot of this, with adjustments being made, some emails going back and forth as we've done that. We're right now doing a working session during the main council meeting, and I think we can probably take a lot of this offline, working with Darren, getting the feedback back and forth on there, and come up with something that's going to be a little more palatable. Because even as we're discussing this, we're not going to see a final product tonight.
I think we could all provide input on this preamble, and that's fine.
But, okay, so how how's this going to work? Is somebody going to draft something that then is sent around and we'll all send in our comments?
Yeah, can you do 2.0?
Well, what we've got is the basis, and we know there's going to be some that are going to be corrected or taken out. We've already identified several of those.
Well, James added
and I think-
additional points, Pat's added additional points, and I'm trying to figure out how is this all going to be compiled into something, and then what is the next step after that?
I mean,
And if we're voting on this in 2 weeks, then we're going to have to come up with a draft before the 2 weeks.
We can do it.
Okay.
We've
Yeah.
got the core of it. We have the core of it, and we need to.
So you got the core. Jeff, you've written down suggestions. Jane, you've added some suggestions. Pat, you've added some
We've
suggestions.
made some. So let's see how it works out.
Okay.
I think we can get another draft distributed out to you on the whereases by the end of the week.
That's great.
And we can make comments back to Jeff or Darren as they
Thank you,
desire.
Jeff.
Thank
And
you.
we'll decide on it at our next meeting.
Okay.
Did you have a question, Jane? I think we're at third base heading home on this project. I don't know what else, other than specifics to the preamble, which we've just talked about, we need to do. I think we've covered the issues and made the decisions we need to make. So unless you have something else, or Jeff, on that, I think we're set. Anybody in the council have any questions or further direction to the council and staff on this project?
I don't have a specific question. I got a comment, though. And first of all, to the staff, I know you've been going back and forth on stuff, and I appreciate all the work that's being done here. I know it's been very challenging in that regard. I understand the pivot with the council from the amortization issue, and I understand that for me. Certainly the risk factor for the council, I think, is important in doing that. The unfortunate part of this is that the way we're tracking here, we're putting a cap on things in exchange for helping a few players out here. And effectively, the economics of this for your people who own short-term rentals is enhanced because now they're going to have basically a certificate that's going to help them sell versus those who don't have that necessarily. So it's an advantageous. It's the law of unintended consequences from government. You start meddling in there, you end up having unintended consequences. And that frustrates me, okay? Because I don't want to help one group or the other. I want the free market to work in its route. And one of the reasons why I'm not really keen on a ban here, because I think the free market will do a better job with it. But I have a message also for the short-term rental owners, okay? Because right now what we've just done with this whole thing is to stop the growth of short-term rentals in our community. This really hasn't done a whole lot about the behavioral issues we talked about before. We did have ordinances on there. So my message on there is I want to strongly encourage you to get together and come up with a voluntary program in which you are conforming to the spirit of what we've talked about in all these months. And talk with folks on there that are working with the that have been so frustrated with this, and come up with a way forward. We don't have the power given to us by the state to regulate this. I've stated before, I truly believe the solution to this is to be able to permit folks to have these, and if they violate certain criteria, we're able to suspend them. We can't do that without the state legislature. So I think we need to push that, and I want the short-term rental folks to also start working with it and work in our community to be able to conform to the behavioral issues that are going on. That's all I have. Thank you.
Good point.
Very, very fair comments, Jeff. Very fair comments indeed. All right, I think we are in agreement that we are completed with this agenda item, and so we'll move on. We have one other agenda item to speak to. I don't know that it's going to take too long, but we can either take a quick break now, come back and finish the regular meeting. Okay. We will take a brief break till 7:20 and then pick up the rest of this regular meeting and go to the work session. Thanks. mentioned the regular meeting of the Pinehurst Village Council on October 11. We'll go to agenda item number 7. And Jeff, do you want to make an introduction on this, and we'll hear from Kelly?
I will, thanks, John. I think everybody recalls that in a previous meeting, we had a fairly brief preliminary discussion with you about our perceptions of the current situation regarding peddling and solicitation that's currently allowed in our municipal code. And we suggested at that time that you all consider a change to the municipal code that would eliminate the opportunity for basically commercial peddling and solicitation across the village. And you gave us the feedback that you were in favor of that. And Kelly, being a person with many talents, has taken us on and created a new ordinance, an ordinance making those changes for your consideration. Go ahead.
Good evening, Council. So as Jeff pointed out, we had the just a brief discussion on September 13th at the work session, and I brought to you that due to some changes in the procedure of being able to do criminal background checks, which was a former part of our ability, the discussion was, from council and recommendation, was to remove the ability for-profit or businesses from being able to solicit or peddle within the village of Pinehurst. This with the exception, which is something that we cannot eliminate, for still allowing those that are for religious purposes or for political purposes or for those exceptions. So this corrections that were made concentrates just on those areas that we talked about, and really the biggest change was adding, if you look at the second page, we have added the verbiage to no person except as allowed in the statute 11003 shall canvass, solicit, or sell food, beverages, services, or merchandise, or engage in any act of canvassing or soliciting in any public or quasi-public place, door to door, place to place, within the village of Pinehurst. So that was the largest addition there. You will note that throughout, this was originally, our municipal code was recodified, and so the changes to the section that you saw on page 1 are different as well, and we will be having to recodify with the elimination of a couple of these sections and moving others up. So you will see those changes in red, with the addition of adding that purpose of regulation as 110.01, and that was what I just read. Also, it included the elimination in language of the background investigation requirement, and it changed language throughout where originally the permit came in and it was processed by the village clerk, sent to the chief of police to do the background check, and he would or she would make the determination on whether or not the permit was approved, and then it would come back to the village clerk to issue that actual permit. So that language has been eliminated, and then the process now will be those that fit the exception will fill out the application. They will mark why they are exempt from being allowed, and then they will also, the application will come to the village clerk. The village clerk now will make that determination on whether the permit is approved or denied. If the permit is denied for a reason that perhaps they have had a violation before in the procedure, then the clerk will note that denial and the reason for. If there is an appeal now, previously it was the appeal went to the village manager from the chief of police. The same thing will occur, except for it will be from village clerk to the village manager. He will then make the final determination on whether or not the appeal is to allow or to deny, and then that will be the permanent process. The elimination of the $10 fee is because previously, again, statute says we cannot charge nonprofits a fee or those for religious or political. We could charge the $10 fee for those that were for-profit for our application process, and that has been part of our charges and fee schedule. That elimination will occur for that reason. changes in the revocation authority is what I just noted. If the actual permit, we have sections in here that state what they can and cannot do if they were maybe visiting the homes later than 5 p.m. or out on Sundays, things that are restricted, then the village clerk would have the right to do the revocation of that permit. And again, if there's appeal process, the same would be true. It would go village clerk to village manager, and he would have the final say-so on that appeal. And the changing of the permit throughout, before we had noted in the old ordinance, a permit was for the for-profit, special permit was for the nonprofit. We have just eliminated the word permit and labeled it all special permit. And then the restructuring and numbering of the section, of the eliminations of section 110 and 111, which was from having to eliminate the other sections of moving up. So at this point, I'll take any questions that the council has on the suggested and proposed changes.
This was developed and from earlier documents, but has the village attorney looked at this, and we need Mike's approval? Or
Yeah,
you think-
village attorney Mike Newman looked at it last week, and he did say he had no problems with it.
Okay, all right. Other questions of Kelly on this, these changes?
I didn't have questions, but as I went through, I saw, just some small things that I would like to change.
Yes, Lydia, you had some points to make on that. Please go ahead. Yeah.
And what I was wondering, is it okay with you guys if I sit down with Kelly and we just clean this up a little bit? There were places, there were subparagraphs, so like they should be paragraphs, but I did have one substantive question. This is under 110.03, capital E. Any person conducting solicitation or canvassing on private property subject to prior express permission of the property owner is exempt from all provisions. I mean, you have permission from the property owner to do canvass on that person's property. That didn't make sense to me. It seemed like that must be contemplating a situation that wasn't clear to me in the language of the ordinance.
So that language was there before, and so what general statute says, we can only govern on private or on public or quasi-public area. We cannot dictate if one of the businesses downtown want to allow somebody to, a good example of that is at the last golf outing, we had several people call the police department with a complaint that somebody was trying to sell tables and chairs and things. They were actually set up near the golf course on a private property and had already attained that permission. So that would be an instance of that. They were set up on the Women's Exchange
So it was
parking
on
lot.
private property?
Correct.
Okay, it's already there. But anyway, back to what I was saying, these are just small things that rather than go here and tell you one small change after another, I really would like to, I mentioned it to Kelly and she's fine with it, just go through and clean, just tighten this just slightly and bring it back in a week, 2 weeks.
I don't have any objection to that.
Okay.
I think it's all right. It may require Mike to look at it again, but
Oh, it's not going to be
Yeah.
that significant, I promise. Okay, just rather than sit here and point out little things, I thought it'd be more simple for us just to sit down. If she agrees with it, give us a new draft and we're done.
How about just sending it out by email once you got all the
Oh.
corrections? And get to us, so the next time we talk about it, it's,
Yeah, it'd be,
Real fast.
well, it'd be on Novus or whatever. Okay.
thank you.
I think if it's acceptable to Kelly and the village manager, then we're all right with that. Yeah, fine. All right, so we'll defer then a decision on that, but thank you for getting it onto this where it's more complicated than I thought, really, when you get it on, and given some of the state regulations and things we have to worry about.
Thank you.
Any other direction for Kelly then on this? Lydia, thank you for your help there. All right, move on to the next agenda item, which is other business. Is there any other business to come to the council this evening? I see none. Comments from attendees? I think the clerk's going to deliver a list here. We have 7 entries. Again, if you keep your remarks to 3 minutes, please, be courteous. And to the topic, the first person on this list is Susie McAuliffe. And the person after that is Jim Fisher. Susie, go ahead.
Okay. I am here to inform the public about how building projects in Pinehurst are being handled these days. I live at 13 Shinnecossett Lane on Pinehurst number 6, beside the now 18-month-long build at 11 Shinnecossett. Many regulations for this build have been broken by the builder and ignored by the town, even as my neighbors and I have repeatedly reported the violations to the Village of Pinehurst Code Compliance Office and the Village of Pinehurst Planning and Zoning Office. During this time, I have been bullied, threatened, and subject to obnoxiously loud, disruptive, and lewd behavior on the building site. The builder built a retaining wall without a permit that is in violation of a restrictive golf course setback. Damage has occurred on my property as a result of this build, and now I'm being told that it is my responsibility to hire an attorney to resolve this. All because Pinehurst offices seem to be more interested in kowtowing to the builders than protecting the property rights of current Pinehurst residents. A partial list of damage and infractions include 2 trees destroyed and severe erosion of soil and pine straw. My property has not seen runoff from any storm since being built in 1993. Only a partial and ineffective silt fence was erected by Gano Construction. Existing water and propane lines have not been properly marked by the builder. I am afraid they are going to be cut, since the builder's markings of my property keep moving and shrinking the size of my property. I was recently advised by the Village of Pinehurst Permit Office to contact 811 locate to have my lines marked, or to hire an attorney if they are cut. Garbage left on site for months and the overflowing dumpster made this build, a golf front property overlooking the 15th tee in Pinehurst number 6, look more like a garbage dump than a building site. Trucks regularly blocking my driveway so that I personally could not get out, and blocking through traffic, which is a hazard to emergency response. Once the situation was so dangerous, while they cut a 100-year-old plus pine tree on the building site, that concerned golfers knocked on my door telling me to move my sick mother to the other side of the house. I have photos and videos of these issues and many more that I don't have time to report tonight. If the Village of Pinehurst does not hold construction companies accountable for this type of total disregard for personal property, this practice by builders will only continue. What is to stop other construction companies from building structures without a permit? If owners receive a variance for something that was built without permission, how is that not favoritism? It seems that builders can do as they please and ask for forgiveness later. Where is the accountability? After all that I've dealt with the past 18 months, should I now have to hire an attorney to fight for my property to be brought back to its original condition before the build? That is what the Village of Pinehurst is telling me. I find this unacceptable. Where are the laws that protect current Village of Pinehurst homeowners? I have not broken any rules, while the builder has broken countless regulations. The Village of Pinehurst should refuse to work with this type of builder and support their citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. I will make note here that I think earlier this afternoon you got some messages from the village manager, which hopefully have addressed some of your concerns tonight. We certainly do have a concern about the overall issues. Thank you for your comments. Mr. Fisher, followed by Mr. Jack Farrell, please.
Jim Fisher, 15 Carolina Vista, Pinehurst. We wouldn't be having this discussion about an issue so rancorous and divisive, short-term rentals, had previous councils and staff listened and had been responsive to the many complaints coming from Pinehurst residents regarding short-term rentals for years. There was a window of opportunity to stop this malignancy to our community, but collectively we allowed it to grow. It was a gold mine as the housing markets exploded and prices skyrocketed, pricing out many locals and families trying to find new homes in single-family zoned areas. Some speculative buyers who might not have been able to afford a house were encouraged by realtors who, with a wink wink, said you can afford this house if you use it as a short-term rental until you're ready to move in or sell. Others, without regard to the fact that turning the house into a short-term rental would make it non-conforming to the Pinehurst zoning laws, bought with the express intent of running it as a business, VRBO, etc. By our turning a blind eye to this issue for years, short-term rental owners, operators, and realtors grew to feel there was an explicit permission to continue this practice, resulting in the growth of short-term rentals from some 40 or so 3 years ago to over 500 today. And as it stands tonight, remains locked at that number, for I see little chance of attrition over the years from what I saw. There are a relatively small number of people, particularly Pinehurst citizens, arguing for the continuation of short-term rentals. What I have seen these last several months is that through their strident voices and threats of lawsuits, this relatively small group has had an outsized influence on our council and village staff. If we had the mechanism for a public referendum on this issue, and I know we don't, there would be an overwhelming vote showing that the residents of Pinehurst do not want to live next to or allow the unbridled growth of short-term rentals. So here we are trying to figure out how to put the greed genie back in the bottle. The pro-short-term rental argument is all about money, the revenue they would stand to lose. They have been making money hand over fist for years and don't want that threatened, even if it was not permitted in the first place. Those of us protesting such a thing and wishing it to stop before it ruins our community are arguing about quality of life, quality of place, and enforcing our zoning laws. I'm very disappointed that the council is not unanimous in its condemnation and banning of the short-term rental business in our community, but it's apparent that this train has already left the station. Those who have shown great courage in standing up against the threats and bullying by well-heeled business groups are to be applauded, as they recognize that the future of Pinehurst is at stake and are willing to stand up and be counted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. Jack Farrell, followed by Isabel Maddox.
Thank you. I am speaking as a private citizen, not representing any board, commission, or organization. For a fleeting moment, I thought I sort of understood the way forward, and I'm trying to get my mind around it right now. I'm not sure I completely do, but this seems to be a solution that no one will be particularly happy with on either side. I guess that's the definition of a good solution. No one's particularly totally happy, so you may have succeeded in that respect. There are some items I'd like to mention that came to mind as I looked at the documentation that was presented tonight. One is relative to the special requirements. As I understand it, the special requirements will extend to and be required of every existing short-term rental that is currently in place. That could be an interesting question. For example, on number I, short-term rental, special requirement I talks to the effect that you can only have 2 per bedroom, as I recall, that's what it said. Well, just a quick random VBRO question of, on January 14th for 7 nights, 2 adults, I got the response that would be 287 lodging units were identified, and 137 of those were houses. I looked at all the houses, and what I discovered is I listed all the bedrooms and advertisement, how many it sleeps. And as an example, of the 3-bedroom houses, there were 44 3-bedroom houses, 73% advertised 7 to 12, sleep 7 to 12. So I suspect that the other 27% will be in compliance. the other 73% will probably not be too happy with this regulation and/or maybe may decline to actually try to apply for a permit. So that'll be interesting, see how you play that out. By the way, the larger the unit, the more likely it is that you'll get closer to the 2 persons per bedroom. The smaller the unit, the more extensive the ability to sleep people is. I guess, I don't know where they're sleeping, anyway. So that's one issue that I think you're going to have to address. The other being, and I think Councilman Morgan actually pointed this out, is that what you're doing is actually adding significant value to that property. So no longer is it just a place you can sell as a home for someone to move into and/or rent on a long-term basis. You can also advertise it as an ongoing transient lodging business. And so it greatly expands your marketability and the value of that property, I suspect. So you've really added a lot of value to those people who will currently have short-term rentals, because they essentially have the ability to sell, transfer to another person or corporation or business, whatever it is, an ongoing transient lodging facility, ongoing. So that's a terrific. The trouble with that is that tends to allow for some shenanigans and/or mischief. And the reason I say that is because the definition of short-term rental that's being proposed doesn't necessarily talk about use. It talks about available for use. That being the case, I can certainly make the case that my house, I have made it available for use because I sent an email to my neighbors and friends and/or some other relatives that should they want to rent it, they can do it next January or February for 5 days. So anyway,
Mr. Farrell, you're beyond time here, so please wrap up.
Okay, let me wrap up. So that's mischief. The other is I am significantly concerned about any changes to 2.3.2 or 2.3 in general. Those changes have never been brought before the public, never been brought before in a forum, never given a public hearing. And I think it's wrong for us to make those changes at this point in time. They may be applicable later, but they should go through the process. They are broad-based changes that affect more than short-term rentals, and they should go through the proper process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell.
Yeah, John, it might be
Please.
helpful for me to make some comments regarding Jack's final comments there. We recognize that issue, and we recognize that we will need to have another public hearing at the council level at the next scheduled council meeting before you can act on this.
Right. That's a good point. Isabel, followed by Kevin Drum. And Isabel, would you identify your location, which is from Raleigh, and who you're representing tonight, please?
Will. Isabel Maddox, P.O. Box 946, Raleigh 27602, here tonight representing Country Club of North Carolina. And I have a couple of comments about what you've discussed tonight. First of all, we don't really like or believe that a non-conforming status. Now, I heard what the gentleman before me said, and in some ways he's right. There is an increase in value if you have an existing grandfathered short-term rental. But generally speaking, being a non-conforming status it does deprive you of some property rights. It can reduce your value. It can reduce your ability to finance it. It can also reduce your ability to rebuild in the event of a fire or some other major catastrophic, which aren't all acts of God. There are some things, big water leaks, mold. There's some things that happen, and it also reduces your opportunity to update your house and make it more functional. It does put you in a status that is not really preferable. And I do think the registration required under the version of the ordinance we saw tonight, I think that's a thinly disguised registration of a short-term rental. I think it's very likely to be disallowed by the state courts, particularly if you're trying to require somebody to state the level of rentals. If they say, oh, I rent it 2 weeks a year or 52 weeks a year. If you're trying to pin them in like that and insist that they do it, I think that you might have a real problem with that if and when you do end up in court on this. I think there are plenty of grounds to regulate short-term rentals. And I think the planning board thought that. I think Ms. Bosch thinks that. There are the nuisance safety regulations. There are also the possibility of development permits. I think those two things give you the structure that you need to regulate these without this ordinance. But that being said, if you're dead set on this, and it seems like you are, I still would like to add a different use to address CCNC's issues, which is a use, and it might be called a golf community accommodation or a resort community accommodation. And that would be for a community that meets certain criteria, such as a size and acreage, minimum number of lots, which has a rental program, which has rules and regulations that try to control or regulate, the things that people find to be a nuisance. And I think, in CCNC's case, they have rentals. They don't have any problems that have been complained about. But they do have a rental program that has been in place for 60 years, and they're very dependent on that to accommodate their members and also to make their financial numbers work. So it's really an important thing that something be crafted that allows them to continue that. So I personally prefer a new use, like a community accommodation within a certain area. The new rezoning district could work. The problem with that, it requires a whole new process. And, going to the members of CCNC and say, we're going to rezone all or some of our property as a hotel, that sounds horrible to them. They don't want a hotel. They're not planning on a hotel. We like to at least, have a different district that we could apply for a rezoning if that's the course that's available, to allow potentially uses within the community as a whole and also their new area they'd like to build in the future. So we really would like to work with staff on either this new use or what if there is the zoning district, and I know we talked about a couple of the zoning different districts in which the short-term rental will be permitted, but we might want to, massage that a little bit. I mean, like, one of the council members was saying, well, if you can do an Airbnb, that doesn't do it. That's not what the rental program would allow. So we'd like to either have a zoning district or a specific use which the program that they have could fit into, because it is not a problem. It's not causing anybody a problem.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. The next speaker is Kevin Drum, followed by Philip Sonia. Not seeing Mr. Drum. Mr. Sonia, please, followed by David Byers.
Need just to wear everybody out. Hey, I'm Philip Sonia, 29 Bedford Circle. I've spoken to really everyone here about this issue. It's interesting because the anti-STR guys look at me and say, you're pro-STR. The pro-STR guys say I'm anti-STR. So I think that's a good balance here as well. I am a little concerned on a lot of the information I provided because a lot of that information has been twisted. I can tell you this. I know this subject in detail. I've researched it extensively. I can tell you how many STRs there are, what the data is, how it aligns with fixed effects regression analysis on the number of platforms established by AirDNA. Mrs. Bosch was totally correct in identifying that AirDNA scrapes data off platforms. And as they acquire platforms, they list platforms being your local newspaper being one. The most obvious of those is they were acquired by a company called Total, T-O-D-Y-L, earlier this year in 2022. Total remarked that when they acquire them, they're going to be able to see 23 to 25% more of the STRs that already exist. They saw 21% more. And now it's at 23, and then it's gone a slight dip since, because they have to always redefine their items and balance their books, basically. I don't think you have as much of a problem as what you think what you're going to get. And I think we need to recognize that. There is a growing propensity of these STR owners and the marketplace that wants to comply. In North Carolina, it's sometimes a little hard because of the permitting requirements. And so I'm working with the system there. This is what I do know. A vast number of the STR owners want to be in that compliance. They will adhere to those rules with third-party oversight and communicate that back to you so you can pick winners and losers. The guys who are doing the right things we want to keep. The guys that aren't doing the right things we want to let go. What are some of the problem sets in that? Well, some of the problem sets, it might be costly. It would be costly if we did host compliance. That's a pretty costly program, very reactive. What you want to have is a proactive approach that addresses communities at the micro levels. Find the problem sets out, fix them, get the owners involved and get the STR community elements out there at the local level so they can fix these items. What items are we going to have as we go to affect this? Well, I'll bring up a couple. One, who are you really damaging? You're not going to fix any local immediate problems right now. That's not what this says. They're not going to change their behavior. You want them to change their behavior. This is not going to do that. What it will do is it will increase intensity inside those properties. Because basically what we did is we bracketed, right, for a military term. We stopped them from growing. We stopped them from producing. And their fear is that you're going to continue to whittle them down, in which case there'll probably be another legal case. What will happen locally? It won't be the guys that rent things out for 270 days a year. That's 11 properties, 11 here total. The guys that are going to get injured are going to be the individuals, the mom and dads that rent their homes out for 30 to 60 days a year so they can see their grandkids, or they can go on their trip to Europe they've always wanted to go to. And as you near, and again, we're in a recession. We already watched the stock market drop 20%. People don't dare access funds in order to do that. They're going to look for additional cash flow to retain their houses, to maintain their current status of living. And they need those funds so that they can go do the things they want to do or even maintain their property. In the long term, I think what you'll see is you'll see more of those homes go up on the market in forbearance. I think you'll see more, and that won't happen immediately, but it will happen. You're going to see less income that's being shared locally because we are already seeing banks restrict funding. We know people can't pull funds out. We're going to see less discretionary spending in a recession. That's going to have an effect here. This might be a great policy. All I would say is the same thing Einstein says, is that if I had 1 hour to save the world, I spend 59 minutes studying the problem and 1 minute acting on it. I would ask you to take a few more minutes to do that. I presented a path forward. I really recommend. That is a cost-effective way for the community who I live and I love to be able to do this without spending really any money and get the solution set and give you the data you need, get you the compliance you want, and get the solution set. And if you want to do this 18 to 24 months later, at the end of the recession, great.
Thank you, Mr. Sonia. David Byers, please.
David Byers, I live at 125 McCaskill Road West in the Village. I understand that y'all have had to deal with this problem for the last 10 months. My family and I have dealt with this problem for the last 10 years. Standing up and doing what is right is not always easy. With what I've heard tonight, it is very disappointing that you're choosing to back down due to the threat of lawsuits and not stand up and fight for what is right for the residents of Pinehurst, which is the banning of STRs in residential neighborhoods.
Thank you, Mr. Byers. Is there anyone else who wishes to address the council tonight on any topic? Seeing none, we'll close the comments from attendees. Is there a motion to adjourn the regular meeting and move to the work session?
I move to adjourn the regular meeting.
That's a motion by Lydia Bosch. Is there a second? Second by Pat Pizzella. All in favor of adjourning the meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.